Into the grizzly's domain. The morning mist clung to the dense canopy of lodgepole pines as Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her hiking pack one final time in the parking lot of the Lamar Valley trailhead. At 34, she had climbed mountains on 4 continents. But something about this particular September morning in Yellowstone National Park felt different. The air carried an electric tension that made her pause and scan the tree line with the practiced eye of someone who had spent the better part of a decade studying wildlife behavior. As a professor of wildlife biology at Montana State University, Sarah had dedicated her career to understanding predator-prey relationships in North American ecosystems. But today, she was simply trying to clear her head after a brutal semester of grant applications and research deadlines. "You're overthinking it again," called Marcus Rivera from across the gravel parking lot, his voice carrying the gentle teasing tone that had become familiar over their 3-year friendship. At 28, Marcus possessed the easy confidence of someone who had grown up in the wilderness areas surrounding Bozeman, Montana. His grandfather, Eduardo Rivera, had been one of the first Latino park rangers in Yellowstone during the 1960s, and Marcus carried that legacy in the sure way he moved through wild spaces. As a wilderness guide and search and rescue volunteer with Park County Search and Rescue, he had pulled more than a dozen people out of dangerous situations in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. His dark hair was already escaping from beneath his well-worn baseball cap, and his brown eyes held the alert awareness of someone constantly reading the landscape around him. Standing beside Marcus, Dr. Jennifer Walsh was methodically checking the contents of her medical kit for the 3rd time since arriving at the trailhead. At 41, Jennifer served as the Emergency Department Director at Bozeman Health Deaconess Hospital, where she had seen every conceivable type of wilderness injury during her 15-year career in emergency medicine. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes reflected the systematic approach she brought to everything from emergency surgeries to weekend hiking trips. She had earned her medical degree from Johns Hopkins and completed her emergency medicine residency at Harbor UCLA, but had chosen to practice in Montana because she believed medicine was most meaningful when it served communities connected to the natural world. "Medical kit complete," Jennifer announced, securing the red nylon bag to the side of her pack. "Trauma supplies, hypothermia kit, emergency medications, satellite communicator, and enough supplies to stabilize serious injuries for at least 48 hours. Her background included advanced wilderness medical training, and she never ventured into the backcountry without being prepared for the worst-case scenarios her profession had taught her were always possible. The 4th member of their group, Robert "Bobby" Hawkins, was having considerably more difficulty organizing his gear. At 19, Bobby was experiencing his first serious backpacking trip, having convinced his 3 companions to let him join their planned 4-day traverse of the Lamar Valley backcountry during his sophomore year at Montana State University. Bobby was studying environmental science with dreams of becoming a park ranger like his heroes, but his enthusiasm far exceeded his experience. His brand new equipment still bore price tags, and he had spent the previous evening watching YouTube videos about proper packing techniques. "Is it normal for everything to feel this heavy?" Bobby asked, struggling to lift his 70-pound pack. His sandy brown hair was already damp with perspiration despite the cool morning air, and his blue eyes held a mixture of excitement and barely concealed anxiety. "You'll adjust," Marcus assured him, though he privately wondered if the kid had packed half his dorm room. "The key is finding your rhythm. The mountains will teach you what you actually need and what you can leave behind." Sarah pulled out her GPS unit and spread a topographic map across the hood of her Subaru Outback. The map showed their planned route, a 4-day loop through some of the most remote wilderness in Yellowstone's northern range. They would hike 12 miles today to their first campsite at Cache Creek, Then continue north along the Lamar River for 2 more days before turning south through the Specimen Ridge area and returning to the Lamar Valley trailhead. The route would take them through prime grizzly bear habitat during the peak of the bear's hyperphagia period, when they were aggressively feeding in preparation for winter hibernation. Current weather forecast shows clear skies for the next 3 days, with temperatures ranging from 28 degrees at night to 65 during the day, Sarah announced, reading from her phone while she still had cellular service. Wind speeds moderate, no precipitation expected until Sunday, which gives us a comfortable margin to complete the loop. Marcus nodded, studying the map over her shoulder. Cache Creek should have good water flow this time of year. The fishing has been excellent according to the backcountry office, which means increased bear activity around the riparian zones. He traced their route with his finger, pausing at several points. We'll need to be especially careful with food storage and camp protocols. The rangers reported fresh grizzly sign along this entire drainage system just last week. Jennifer finished loading her pack into the bear-proof food storage container they would carry, a hard-sided plastic cylinder designed to prevent bears from accessing human food. All food, toiletries, and scented items secured, she reported. Emergency rations distributed among all packs in case of separation. Bobby was frantically rifling through his pack, his face growing red with exertion and frustration. "I can't find my water filter," he announced, his voice cracking slightly with stress. "Slow down," Marcus said gently, walking over to help. "Panic is the enemy of good decision-making in the wilderness. Let's go through your pack systematically." He began helping Bobby organize his gear, noting with some concern the number of unnecessary items the young man had brought. A camp chair, multiple changes of clothes, a full-size towel, and at least 5 pounds of emergency snacks that seemed more appropriate for a convenience store than a wilderness environment. Sarah finished entering waypoints into her GPS unit and looked up at the sky. At 7:30 a.m., the sun was burning through the morning mist, revealing the spectacular landscape that surrounded them. The Lamar Valley stretched eastward like a vast amphitheater, its grasslands still green from summer rains, but beginning to show the golden edges that marked the approach of autumn. Massive, glacially carved mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already dusted with early snow that glowed pink in the morning light. This was the landscape that had earned Yellowstone its designation as America's Serengeti, a place where large predators and their prey still existed in something approaching their natural balance. "The trailhead register shows we're the first group signing in today," Sarah announced, returning from the wooden kiosk that marked the beginning of the Lamar Valley Trail. "Let's make sure everyone understands our protocols for bear safety." She pulled out a laminated card that outlined proper behavior in bear country. Make noise while hiking, especially around blind corners and dense vegetation. Stay together as a group. If we encounter a bear, do not run. Back away slowly while facing the animal, speak in calm tones, and make yourself appear large by raising your arms or jacket above your head. Marcus pulled out the canister of bear spray he carried on his belt. Everyone has bear spray accessible on their person, not buried in their pack. Safety off, thumb on the trigger, effective range of about 20 feet. But remember, bear spray is a last resort. Our primary defense is avoiding encounters through proper wilderness protocols. Jennifer nodded toward the tree line that bordered the parking area. Grizzly bears in this ecosystem can weigh up to 800 pounds and run 35 miles per hour. They can climb trees, swim rivers, and have a sense of smell 7 times more acute than a bloodhound. We're entering their territory, so we need to respect that we are guests here. Bobby's eyes widened as he absorbed this information. "Have any of you actually encountered a grizzly before?" "Twice," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "Both times the bear was more interested in getting away from us than causing trouble. Bears are intelligent animals that generally want to avoid human contact. Most negative encounters happen when bears are surprised, defending cubs or food sources, or when humans behave unpredictably. Sarah consulted her watch. 8:15 a.m. We need to be on the trail by 8:30 to maintain our planned schedule. The approach to Cache Creek involves some exposed ridge walking where we'll want to avoid being caught in afternoon thunderstorms. The group completed their final preparations in the crisp morning air. Marcus checked everyone's pack straps and weight distribution. Jennifer verified that each person carried the emergency whistle, flashlight, and basic first aid supplies she had distributed. Sarah programmed the emergency GPS coordinates into her satellite communicator, a device capable of sending distress signals even in areas without cellular coverage. Bobby was still struggling with his pack weight, but Marcus had helped him redistribute the load and eliminate some non-essential items. Leave the camp chair and the extra clothes, Marcus advised. The weather forecast is stable, and you'll generate plenty of body heat hiking with a heavy pack. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the four hikers crossed the wooden bridge that marked the official beginning of the Lamar Valley Trail. The path immediately entered a dense grove of aspen trees, whose leaves had begun their autumn transformation from green to gold. The morning light filtered through the canopy in shifting patterns that danced across the forest floor, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk circling high above the valley. Sarah led the group, setting a moderate pace that allowed for conversation while maintaining awareness of their surroundings. The trail was well maintained but narrow, winding through terrain that alternated between dense forest and open meadows. Every few hundred yards, she paused to check her GPS unit and compare their progress to the topographic map. The first 3 miles follow Soda Butte Creek through mixed conifer forest, she explained during one of these stops. We'll gain about 800 feet of elevation gradually, then cross into the Cache Creek drainage, where the terrain becomes more open. Marcus walked second in line, his head constantly moving as he scanned the surrounding forest for signs of wildlife activity. His grandfather had taught him to read the landscape like a book, noting everything from the direction of bent grass to the freshness of animal tracks in soft soil. Elk sign everywhere, he commented, pointing to fresh hoofprints in a muddy section of trail. This is prime habitat during the rut. Bulls will be aggressive and unpredictable this time of year. Jennifer maintained her position third in the hiking order, where she could monitor both Bobby's condition ahead of her and watch for any hazards Marcus might miss. Her medical training had taught her to constantly assess the physical and mental state of those around her, and she noted that Bobby was already breathing harder than the moderate pace and gentle terrain warranted. "How are you feeling, Bobby?" she called forward during a rest stop near a small waterfall where Soda Butte Creek tumbled over a series of granite ledges. "Good," Bobby replied, though sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "This is incredible. I mean, I've seen pictures of Yellowstone, but being here is completely different." He gestured toward the surrounding landscape with obvious awe. "It's like stepping back in time to when the whole continent looked like this." Sarah smiled at his enthusiasm. "That's exactly what drew me to wildlife biology. These ecosystems represent millions of years of evolution, predator-prey relationships that have been refined over thousands of generations. Every plant, every animal, every geological feature is connected in ways we're still learning to understand." They continued hiking through the morning, gradually climbing away from Soda Butte Creek toward the Cache Creek drainage. The forest began to thin as they gained elevation, offering increasingly spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. The Absaroka Range stretched to the north, its peaks rising over 11,000 feet and still bearing substantial snow from the previous winter. To the south, the Gallatin Range marked the boundary between Yellowstone National Park and the Gallatin National Forest. At 10:45 a.m., they reached a significant trail junction where the Lamar Valley Trail intersected with the Cache Creek Trail. Sarah consulted her map and GPS unit, while the others rested and hydrated. We turn north here and follow Cache Creek for the next 8 miles to our campsite. The terrain becomes more open, with several meadow crossings where we'll have excellent visibility. Marcus studied the surrounding area with increased attention. This is where we need to start making noise regularly. Open meadows provide good visibility for us, but they're also where bears like to feed on roots, berries, and small mammals. A surprised bear in open terrain can close distance very quickly. Jennifer pulled out her satellite communicator and sent a brief status message to the emergency contact they had designated. Day 1, mile 3, all well on schedule. The device confirmed the message was transmitted successfully to the Yellowstone Backcountry office, where their itinerary was logged with park rangers. Bobby was examining his feet during the rest stop, his expression showing concern. "I think I might be getting a blister on my left heel." Jennifer immediately moved into medical mode. "Let's take a look." She examined Bobby's foot and found the beginning of a hot spot that could develop into a problematic blister if not addressed. This is exactly why we stop and deal with minor issues before they become major problems. She cleaned the area with an antiseptic wipe and applied a specialized blister prevention patch. "How do your boots feel?" "Too tight. Too loose." "Maybe a little tight," Bobby admitted. "I bought them last week and didn't really have time to break them in properly." Marcus shook his head. "Rule number 1 of wilderness travel: never wear new boots on a multi-day trip. But we'll manage. Jennifer's right to address this now. A serious blister can end your trip and create emergency situations in remote areas." They resumed hiking at 11:15 a.m., following the Cache Creek Trail as it wound through increasingly open terrain. The path here was less maintained than the main Lamar Valley Trail, with sections that required careful navigation around fallen trees and erosion areas. Sarah continued to lead, but Marcus moved closer to the front of the group as the terrain became more challenging. The Cache Creek Valley opened before them like a hidden world within Yellowstone's vast wilderness. The creek itself meandered through a series of beaver ponds and marshy areas that created ideal habitat for moose, elk, and the carnivores that preyed upon them. Willows and aspens lined the waterway, their autumn colors creating a brilliant tapestry of gold and orange against the deep green of surrounding conifers. "This is grizzly bear paradise," Sarah observed, pausing to photograph a section of muddy ground that showed clear bear tracks. Fresh water, abundant vegetation, fish during spawning season, and prey animals that come to drink. Bears use these riparian corridors as highways through their territory. Marcus knelt to examine the tracks more closely. "These are fresh, probably from yesterday or early this morning. Large bear, adult grizzly based on the size and claw marks. Moving north along the creek, same direction we're heading." Jennifer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "How far ahead of us do you think it is?" "Could be anywhere," Marcus replied honestly. "Bears don't follow predictable schedules like humans. It might be miles away by now, or it could be just around the next bend. That's why we maintain constant awareness and follow protocols." Bobby's enthusiasm was now tempered by a growing awareness of the realities of wilderness travel. What would happen if we actually encountered it? Sarah answered while continuing to study the tracks. Most bear encounters end with the bear leaving the area. Bears have excellent hearing and smell, so they usually know we're coming long before we see them. The danger comes when bears are surprised, protecting cubs or defending a food source. They spent several more minutes examining the area around the tracks, noting other signs of bear activity, including claw marks on aspen trees and areas where the ground had been excavated for roots or rodents. The evidence painted a picture of an ecosystem where large predators were not just present, but actively shaping the landscape through their daily activities. At 12:30 p.m., they stopped for lunch beside one of the larger beaver ponds, choosing a location with good visibility in all directions. Jennifer insisted on a thorough foot check for Bobby, whose blister prevention patch was working, but whose boots were clearly not ideal for extended hiking. Marcus set up a small camp stove to heat water for their dehydrated meals, while Sarah consulted her GPS and marked their progress on the topographic map. "We're making good time," she announced. 5.5 miles completed, 6.5 miles remaining to our campsite. Current pace should have us there by 4 p.m., which gives us plenty of daylight to set up camp and secure our food properly. The lunch break lasted 45 minutes, during which they observed a variety of wildlife in the marsh environment around them. A great blue heron hunted motionlessly in the shallows of the beaver pond. Red-winged blackbirds called from cattails along the shore. High overhead, a golden eagle circled on thermal updrafts, scanning the meadows for ground squirrels and marmots. "This is why I love wilderness medicine," Jennifer commented, watching the eagle's effortless flight. "In the emergency department, I see people at their worst moments, dealing with trauma and crisis. Out here you remember that healing and wholeness are the natural state of things." Bobby had removed his boots and was soaking his feet in the cold creek water. "I can't believe places like this still exist. I mean, I grew up in suburban Denver, and the wildest thing I ever saw was a raccoon in our garbage can." Marcus smiled. "Your perspective is about to change permanently. Once you've experienced true wilderness, everything else feels a little artificial. It gets in your blood." They resumed hiking at 1:15 p.m., entering a section of trail that crossed a series of open meadows separated by fingers of forest that extended down from the surrounding ridges. The Cache Creek continued to parallel their route, its clear water reflecting the deep blue of the autumn sky. The trail here was less distinct, marked primarily by cairns and the occasional orange diamond nailed to trees at the edge of clearings. Sarah found herself checking her GPS unit more frequently as the trail became harder to follow. Navigation becomes more challenging in these open areas. The path is there, but it's not always obvious where it goes next. Marcus had taken the lead, using his experience to read the subtle signs that marked the established route. "Look for the line of least resistance," he instructed the others. "Trail builders follow natural contours, avoid steep slopes and wet areas. The path should feel logical, even when it's not clearly visible." At 2:30 p.m., they reached a significant creek crossing where Cache Creek had carved a channel too deep and swift to rock hop safely. Marcus scouted upstream and downstream, looking for a safer crossing point, while the others rested in the shade of large cottonwood trees. "There's a log bridge about 200 yards upstream," he reported. "Looks stable, but we'll need to cross one at a time and use trekking poles for balance." The crossing took 20 minutes, with Marcus going first to test the stability of the fallen log that served as a bridge, then helping each person across individually. Bobby was visibly nervous about the exposure, but made it safely with Jennifer spotting him from behind, and Sarah ready to assist from the far side. "Good job," Marcus told Bobby as they regrouped on the north side of the creek. "You're learning to trust your balance and equipment. That's an important skill in wilderness travel." The terrain beyond the crossing became more challenging, with the trail climbing steeply through dense forest toward a saddle that would provide access to the upper Cache Creek drainage. Sarah estimated they had gained nearly 1,500 feet of elevation since leaving the trailhead, and the effects were becoming noticeable in the way everyone was breathing. "Take your time," Jennifer advised Bobby, who was clearly working harder than the others. "Elevation affects everyone differently, and you're carrying more weight than you're used to. There's no shame in frequent rest stops." At 3:45 p.m., they reached the saddle and were rewarded with spectacular views of the Cache Creek Basin, stretching north toward the Montana border. Their campsite was visible in the distance, a grove of mature spruce trees beside a large meadow where the creek made a sweeping bend through the valley floor. "Camp is about a mile away," Sarah announced, consulting her GPS unit. "All downhill from here, so we should arrive right on schedule." The descent toward their campsite took them through some of the most beautiful terrain they had encountered all day. Ancient spruce and fir trees towered overhead, their branches hung with old man's beard lichen that created an almost mystical atmosphere. The forest floor was carpeted with a thick layer of pine needles that muffled their footsteps and released the distinctive fragrance of high-altitude conifers. Marcus had returned to the front of the group, but his demeanor had become more alert as they approached their camping area. "We're entering the zone where we need to be extra cautious," he explained. "Bears often establish regular travel routes along creek bottoms, and camping areas can attract them because of residual food odors from previous campers." At 4:20 p.m., they reached their designated campsite, a flat area beside Cache Creek that offered good drainage, protection from wind, and multiple escape routes. The site showed evidence of previous use, with the established fire ring and several level spots that had been cleared for tents. "First priority is a thorough site inspection," Marcus announced, dropping his pack but not relaxing his vigilance. "We need to check for recent bear sign, examine the area for potential hazards, and establish our camp layout for maximum safety." Sarah and Marcus conducted a systematic inspection of the campsite and surrounding area, while Jennifer helped Bobby with his pack and began assessing his physical condition after the day's hike. They found no fresh bear sign, but discovered several old scat deposits and claw marks on trees that indicated regular bear usage of the area. "This is definitely bear habitat," Sarah concluded, "but no evidence of recent activity. We'll need to be extremely careful with food storage and camp hygiene." The group spent the next hour establishing their camp according to the triangle system recommended for bear country: tents in one area, cooking and eating area at least 100 yards away, and food storage area another 100 yards distant from both. Marcus supervised the setup process, ensuring that everyone understood the importance of keeping the camping area completely free of any food odors. Jennifer had set up her medical station in her tent and was conducting a more thorough examination of Bobby's feet. "The blister prevention worked well," she reported, "but you've got some significant swelling and a few more hot spots developing. We'll need to monitor this closely over the next few days." Bobby was sitting beside the creek, soaking his feet in the cold water and marveling at the wilderness surrounding them. "I can't believe how quiet it is," he observed. "At school, there's always traffic, music, people talking. Here, you can actually hear the silence." Sarah was setting up her tent when she paused, listening intently to something in the distance. "Do you hear that?" she asked the others. They all stopped what they were doing and listened. From somewhere upstream, perhaps half a mile away, came a sound that was unmistakably not human. A deep, rhythmic splashing accompanied by occasional grunts and heavy breathing. Marcus immediately moved to his pack and retrieved his binoculars. "Could be a moose," he said quietly, "but we should investigate from a safe distance." The four hikers crept quietly through the trees toward the sound, which was coming from a section of creek where the water formed a series of deeper pools. Marcus led the way, using hand signals to indicate when they should stop and listen. The sounds were becoming clearer and more distinct. Definitely a large animal moving through water, accompanied by what sounded like feeding behavior. At a distance of about 200 yards, Marcus found a position on a small rise that provided a clear view of the creek through his binoculars. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Grizzly bear," he whispered to the others. "Large adult, probably a male. It's fishing in the pools, completely focused on feeding." Sarah carefully took the binoculars and observed the bear for several minutes. It was indeed a massive grizzly. its thick brown coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight as it waded through the creek pools, occasionally diving its head underwater to catch fish or pursue aquatic prey. "Beautiful animal," she whispered, "but this changes our situation significantly. It's feeding actively, which means it's likely to remain in this area for an extended period." Jennifer felt her heart rate increase as she realized the implications. "How far is it from our campsite?" Marcus consulted his GPS unit. "About half a mile upstream from us. The wind is blowing from the south, so it probably hasn't detected our scent yet. But that could change if the wind shifts." Bobby was staring wide-eyed at the massive predator through the binoculars. "It's enormous. How much do you think it weighs?" 600 pounds minimum, Sarah estimated. Possibly more. An adult male grizzly in good condition before hibernation can weigh 800 pounds or more. They watched the bear for another 10 minutes, noting its behavior patterns and feeding locations. It seemed completely absorbed in fishing, moving methodically from pool to pool and showing no awareness of human presence in the area. "We need to modify our camp protocols," Marcus decided. Extra vigilance on food storage, noisemakers when moving around camp, and someone on watch duty during the night. They returned to their campsite as quietly as they had approached the bear's location, each person lost in their own thoughts about sharing this remote valley with one of North America's most powerful predators. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the meadow, and the temperature was beginning to drop as evening approached. "Dinner preparation needs to happen quickly and efficiently," Jennifer announced, taking charge of the cooking process. "We want to minimize the time that food odors are present in the area." Marcus set up a rope system for hanging their bear-proof food containers from a high tree branch, ensuring that the containers would be at least 12 feet off the ground and 8 feet from the nearest tree trunk. "Even with bear-proof containers, elevation is our best defense," he explained to Bobby, who was watching the process intently. Sarah was monitoring weather conditions and checking her satellite communicator for any emergency messages. "Barometric pressure is holding steady. No weather alerts from the Park Service. We should have a clear night for observation and rest." As they prepared and ate their dehydrated meals, the group discussed their options for the remainder of their planned route. The presence of an actively feeding grizzly bear in their immediate area didn't necessarily mean they needed to abandon their trip, but it did require heightened caution and modified behavior. "The bear is focused on fishing right now," Sarah observed, "but grizzlies are opportunistic feeders. If it detects food odors from our camp, it could investigate. We need to be prepared for that possibility." Bobby was struggling with the reality of their situation. "Are we safe here? I mean, should we pack up and hike out?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Hiking out in approaching darkness would be more dangerous than staying here and following proper protocols. Bears are crepuscular, meaning they're most active at dawn and dusk. Moving through bear habitat during those periods increases the likelihood of an encounter. Jennifer was organizing her medical supplies and checking her emergency equipment. "Our satellite communicator has GPS tracking enabled, so search and rescue teams would know our exact location if we needed emergency assistance. The question is whether we can minimize risk sufficiently to continue with our planned route." As darkness fell over the Cache Creek Valley, the group completed their evening routines with meticulous attention to bear safety protocols. All food, toiletries, and scented items were secured in the bear-proof containers and suspended from the rope system Marcus had established. Cooking gear was cleaned thoroughly and stored with the food. Everyone changed out of the clothes they had worn while cooking, placing those garments in the food storage area as well. "First watch will be from 9 p.m. to midnight, Marcus announced. "I'll take it. Sarah, you take midnight to 3 a.m. Jennifer, 3 to 6 a.m. Bobby, you rest tonight, but tomorrow night you'll start taking watches." Bobby looked relieved, but also somewhat guilty. "I want to help." I don't want to be a burden on the group." "You're not a burden," Sarah assured him. "But wilderness travel is about playing to everyone's strengths and managing risks intelligently. Right now, your job is to rest, recover from today's hike, and prepare for tomorrow." The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun disappeared behind the western mountains. By 9:30 p.m., frost was beginning to form on the grass around their tents, and their breath was visible in the beam of their flashlights. The sky was brilliantly clear, revealing a canopy of stars that was impossible to see from any populated area. Marcus sat quietly near the center of camp, his back against a large pine tree and his bear spray within easy reach. The night sounds of the wilderness gradually emerged as the group settled into their sleeping bags. The distant howl of coyotes, the splash of beaver moving through their ponds, the rustle of small mammals in the underbrush. At 11:45 p.m., Marcus heard something that made him instantly alert. The sound of a large animal moving through the forest, approximately 300 yards from their camp. Heavy footsteps, breaking branches, occasional grunts that could only come from a very large creature. He listened intently for 15 minutes, tracking the sounds as they moved parallel to the creek, neither approaching nor receding from their location. The sounds eventually faded into the distance, but Marcus remained hyper-vigilant for the remainder of his watch. When Sarah took over at midnight, he briefed her quietly about what he had heard. "Could have been the bear from this afternoon," he whispered, "or it could have been an elk or moose. Hard to tell in the darkness, but definitely something large moving through the area." Sarah's watch passed without incident, though she remained constantly aware of every sound in the forest around them. The creek provided a steady background of white noise that could potentially mask the approach of large animals, so she found herself straining to hear any unusual sounds above the water's constant murmur. At 3 a.m., Jennifer took over the watch duty. As an emergency physician, she was accustomed to staying alert during long night shifts, but the wilderness environment added a dimension of stress she had never experienced in the hospital. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed amplified and potentially threatening. Jennifer's medical training had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about the night felt wrong. The forest seemed too quiet, with fewer of the small animal sounds that had characterized the earlier hours of darkness. Even the creek seemed to be flowing more quietly, though she knew that was probably her imagination. At 4:30 a.m., as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Jennifer heard something that made her heart race. The unmistakable sound of sniffing and heavy breathing coming from the direction of their food storage area. She immediately woke Marcus with a gentle touch on his shoulder, pointing toward the sounds and holding her finger to her lips for silence. Marcus was instantly awake and alert, listening intently to the sounds Jennifer had detected. The sniffing was clearly audible now, accompanied by the sound of a large animal moving carefully through the forest. Marcus reached for his bear spray and flashlight, but did not turn on the light immediately. The sounds continued for several more minutes, then suddenly stopped. Marcus and Jennifer remained frozen in place, listening for any indication of what the animal was doing. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, they heard the sounds of the large animal moving away from their camp, traveling upstream in the direction they had seen the grizzly bear feeding the previous afternoon. "That was definitely a bear," Marcus whispered to Jennifer. "It found our food storage area, but couldn't access the containers. The rope system worked exactly as designed." Jennifer was shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the encounter. "How close do you think it came to our tents?" "Probably within 50 yards, Marcus estimated. "Close enough to investigate thoroughly, but it didn't find anything to interest it in our immediate camping area." They decided to remain awake for the rest of the night, quietly monitoring their surroundings as the sun gradually rose over the Cache Creek Valley. By 6 a.m., full daylight had returned, and they woke Sarah and Bobby to brief them about the nighttime visitor. "This changes our risk assessment," Sarah said after hearing the details of the encounter. "A bear that's willing to investigate human camps is potentially more dangerous than one that simply avoids human areas." Bobby looked pale and shaken by the news that a grizzly bear had been so close to their tents during the night. What would have happened if it had decided to investigate our tents instead of the food storage area? "Bear spray and emergency protocols," Marcus replied calmly. "But the fact that it was attracted to the food storage area and left when it couldn't access anything is actually encouraging. It suggests the bear was exhibiting normal curiosity rather than aggressive behavior." Jennifer was already checking her satellite communicator for any emergency messages and preparing to send a status update to the Park Service. "Should we report the bear encounter to the backcountry office?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Yes, we should report it. The Park Service needs to track bear behavior patterns, especially bears that show interest in human camps. But I don't think this necessarily means we need to abort our trip." They spent the next hour breaking camp and preparing for the day's hike, with everyone hyper-aware of their surroundings and meticulous about eliminating any trace of food odors from their gear. Marcus conducted a thorough inspection of the food storage area and found clear evidence of the bear's visit: large paw prints in the soft soil and claw marks on the tree where their containers had been suspended. "It's a large bear," Marcus confirmed, measuring the paw prints with his hand. "Probably the same one we observed fishing yesterday afternoon. The good news is that it investigated, found nothing accessible, and left without damaging our equipment or becoming aggressive." At 8 a.m., they began hiking north along the Cache Creek Trail toward their second campsite, 12 miles away in the upper reaches of the drainage. The morning was crisp and clear, with frost still coating the grass in shaded areas, and their breath visible in the cold air. Everyone was more alert than they had been the previous day, scanning the surrounding forest constantly and making noise regularly to avoid surprising any wildlife. The trail followed Cache Creek through increasingly spectacular wilderness, climbing gradually through subalpine meadows dotted with small lakes and seasonal ponds. The autumn colors were at their peak, with aspen groves creating brilliant splashes of gold against the dark green of conifers and the pale gray of granite cliffs. "This is some of the most remote country in the lower 48 states," Sarah commented during a rest stop beside one of the alpine lakes. "We're at least 15 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by millions of acres of designated wilderness." Marcus was studying the topographic map and GPS coordinates. "Our route today takes us over Specimen Ridge, then down into the Upper Lamar drainage. It's beautiful country, but it's also prime grizzly habitat. Bears use these high meadows extensively during late summer and fall." Bobby had recovered his enthusiasm for the adventure, though he remained much more aware of potential dangers than he had been the previous day. "Last night was terrifying and amazing at the same time," he admitted. "I mean, how many people get to have a real wilderness experience like that?" Jennifer was monitoring Bobby's physical condition and was pleased to see that his feet were holding up well despite the previous day's problems. "Your body is adapting to the demands of wilderness travel," she observed. "That's exactly what should happen with proper pacing and care." At 10:30 a.m., they began the climb toward Specimen Ridge, a long granite backbone that divided the Cache Creek drainage from the Upper Lamar River Valley. The trail became much steeper and more challenging, switchbacking through dense forest before emerging into open alpine terrain above the tree line. The views from Specimen Ridge were spectacular, providing panoramic vistas of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem stretching in all directions. To the north, the Beartooth Mountains rose above 11,000 feet, their peaks already covered with snow from early autumn storms. To the south, the Gallatin Range marked the boundary between the park and national forest lands. Eastward, the Absaroka Range extended toward the Montana Plains, while westward lay the heart of Yellowstone with its geothermal features and extensive wilderness areas. "This is why I became a biologist," Sarah said, surveying the vast landscape spread out below them. "To understand how ecosystems function on this scale, you need to see them from perspectives like this." Marcus was using his binoculars to scan the meadows and forest openings below them for signs of wildlife. "Excellent visibility from up here. I can see several elk herds in the distance, and there's definitely bear sign along the creek drainages." The crossing of Specimen Ridge took most of the morning, with the group stopping frequently to rest, navigate, and simply absorb the magnificent scenery surrounding them. At the highest point of the ridge, they encountered a weather station that had been installed by park researchers to monitor climate conditions in the high country. Data from stations like this helps scientists understand how climate change is affecting high-altitude ecosystems, Sarah explained, examining the solar panels and instruments that comprise the automated monitoring station. Temperature and precipitation patterns at this elevation have changed significantly over the past several decades. The descent from Specimen Ridge into the upper Lamar drainage was steep and technically challenging, requiring careful foot placement and frequent use of trekking poles for stability. The trail switchbacked through loose scree and granite slabs that had been polished smooth by thousands of years of weather and erosion. "Take your time on this section," Marcus advised. "A twisted ankle or fall in terrain like this could create a serious emergency situation. We're still many miles from any road or rescue access." Bobby was moving much more confidently than he had on the previous day, having learned to trust his balance and equipment during the morning's climb. "I'm starting to understand what you meant about the mountains teaching you what you need," he told Marcus during one of their rest stops. By 1 p.m. they had completed the descent from Specimen Ridge and were hiking through the upper Lamar drainage, following a faint trail that paralleled the infant Lamar River as it wound through high meadows and willow thickets. This was some of the most remote terrain in Yellowstone, rarely visited by hikers and serving as critical habitat for grizzly bears, wolves, and other large predators. Sarah was monitoring their GPS coordinates carefully, as the trail was barely visible in many sections, and navigation required constant attention to landmarks and compass bearings. "We're about 4 miles from our planned campsite," she announced during a map check. "The terrain should become easier as we drop into the main Lamar Valley." The afternoon hike took them through a series of high meadows that showed extensive evidence of bear activity. Excavation sites where bears had been digging for roots and ground squirrels were visible every few hundred yards, and several trees showed fresh claw marks where bears had marked their territory. "This is definitely active bear country," Marcus observed, examining a particularly fresh excavation site. "These diggings are probably from within the last week. Bears are working hard right now to build fat reserves for winter hibernation." Jennifer was feeling increasingly uneasy about the amount of fresh bear sign they were encountering. "Are we walking into a concentration area where multiple bears are feeding?" "Possibly," Sarah replied honestly. "Late September is peak hyperphagia season for grizzlies. They can gain 3 to 4 pounds per day during this period, so they're extremely focused on high-calorie food sources." At 3:30 p.m., they reached a section of trail that descended through dense willow thickets toward the main Lamar Valley. The vegetation was so thick that visibility was limited to just a few feet in any direction, creating perfect conditions for accidentally surprising wildlife. "Maximum noise protocol through this section," Marcus announced, pulling out a small bell that he clipped to his pack. "If there's a bear in these willows, we want it to know we're coming from as far away as possible." The group began calling out regularly as they pushed through the dense vegetation, following a trail that was little more than a game path winding between the closely spaced willow stems. The sound of their voices and footsteps seemed muffled by the thick vegetation, creating an eerie sense of isolation and vulnerability. Sarah was leading the group when she suddenly stopped and held up her hand for silence. Ahead of them, perhaps 50 yards away, something large was moving through the willows. The vegetation was too dense to see what it was, but the sounds were unmistakably those of a very large animal pushing through the brush. "Back up slowly," Marcus whispered, moving forward to stand beside Sarah. "Don't run, but put some distance between us and whatever that is." The group retreated about 20 yards and waited, listening intently to the sounds ahead of them. The large animal seemed to be moving parallel to their route, rather than toward them, but it was impossible to tell exactly what it was or where it was going. "Could be an elk," Jennifer whispered hopefully. "Could be," Marcus agreed, "but we're not taking any chances. We'll wait here for 10 minutes, then continue with maximum noise and alertness." Bobby was gripping his bear spray with white knuckles, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "This is really happening," he whispered. "We're actually sharing this space with wild animals that could kill us." "Remember your training," Sarah whispered back. "Fear is natural and healthy, but panic is dangerous. We have protocols, equipment, and experience to handle these situations safely." After 10 minutes of listening, the sounds ahead of them had faded into the distance. The group resumed hiking through the willow thickets, making even more noise than before and maintaining constant vigilance for any signs of wildlife. The trail seemed to wind endlessly through the dense vegetation, creating a claustrophobic environment that was unlike anything they had experienced during the previous day and a half of hiking. At 4:45 p.m., they finally emerged from the willow thickets into the open grasslands of the Upper Lamar Valley. The relief of having good visibility again was palpable, and everyone paused to scan the surrounding area for any signs of the large animal they had heard in the willows. "Clear terrain ahead," Marcus announced, using his binoculars to examine the route to their planned campsite. "I can see our camping area from here, about 2 miles across the valley floor." Their second campsite was located beside the Lamar River, where it made a broad bend through the valley bottom. Unlike the previous night's forested location, this site was in completely open terrain that would provide excellent visibility in all directions, but virtually no protection from weather or wildlife. "Different challenges tonight," Sarah observed as they approached the campsite. "We'll have great visibility, but we'll also be highly visible to any animals in the area." The campsite itself was even more primitive than the previous night's location, with no established fire ring or cleared tent sites. They would be camping on native grass beside the river, following leave-no-trace principles to minimize their impact on the fragile ecosystem. "Site selection is critical here," Marcus explained as they surveyed their options. "We need good drainage, protection from wind, and multiple escape routes while staying at least 200 feet from the river to protect riparian habitat." Jennifer was already conducting her evening medical check on Bobby, whose feet had held up well during the day's challenging hike. "Your conditioning is improving rapidly," she noted. "The human body adapts quickly to new physical demands when they're introduced gradually." As they set up camp in the open grassland, the group was acutely aware of their exposure and visibility. Unlike the previous night's forested location, there was nowhere to hide if they encountered dangerous wildlife. Their safety would depend entirely on their protocols, equipment, and ability to work together as a team. "Food storage is going to be challenging without tall trees," Marcus noted, surveying their options for hanging their bear-proof containers. "We'll need to modify our approach." Sarah was setting up her tent when she noticed something that made her call the others over immediately. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an area of soft soil near the river's edge. The ground was covered with fresh animal tracks, including several clear grizzly bear prints that appeared to have been made within the last 24 hours. The tracks showed that at least one large bear had been using this exact area regularly, probably coming to the river to drink and fish. "This changes everything," Marcus said grimly, studying the tracks. "We're not just in bear habitat, we're camping in what appears to be a regular travel corridor." Jennifer felt her medical training kicking in as she assessed their risk factors. "What are our options? Continue with modified protocols or relocate to a different area?" Sarah consulted her topographic map and GPS unit. "The next designated camping area is 8 miles south, which would require hiking in darkness through terrain we haven't scouted. That might be more dangerous than staying here with maximum precautions." Bobby was staring at the bear tracks with obvious concern. "How big do you think this bear is?" Marcus knelt beside the clearest tracks and measured them carefully. "Large adult, probably male, definitely a grizzly. These tracks are fresh, probably from early this morning or late yesterday." The group spent the next hour implementing the most rigorous bear safety protocols they could devise. Their bear-proof food containers were secured using a complex rope system anchored to multiple points, creating a web that would be impossible for any animal to access. All scented items were stored with the food, and everyone changed into clean clothes that had never been exposed to cooking odors. "Triple watch scheduled tonight," Marcus announced. 2 people awake at all times, 4-hour shifts, bear spray and emergency equipment immediately accessible. Jennifer was organizing her medical supplies when she paused, listening to something in the distance. "Do you hear that?" The others stopped what they were doing and listened. From somewhere upstream, perhaps half a mile away, came the sound of splashing water and occasional grunts that they now recognized as the feeding behavior of a large grizzly bear. "It's fishing again," Sarah said quietly. "Same pattern as yesterday afternoon. The bear has established a routine, and we're camping right in the middle of its territory." Marcus was using his binoculars to scan the river upstream, trying to locate the source of the sounds. "I can't see it from here, but it's definitely a large animal feeding in the water. Could be the same bear we encountered yesterday, or it could be a different one." Bobby was struggling with the reality of their situation. "Are we safe here? I mean, really safe?" "No wilderness environment is completely safe," Jennifer replied honestly. "But we can manage risk to acceptable levels through proper protocols and equipment. The question is whether you're comfortable with the level of risk we're accepting by staying here." Sarah was monitoring weather conditions and checking for any emergency messages on her satellite communicator. "Weather remains stable. No alerts from the Park Service. Our emergency communications are functioning properly, so rescue teams would know our exact location if needed." As darkness fell over the Lamar Valley, the temperature dropped rapidly toward the freezing point. The clear sky revealed a spectacular display of stars that was unmarred by any artificial light pollution, but also provided no natural illumination for monitoring their surroundings. "First watch, Marcus and I will take it together," Sarah announced. "Bobby and Jennifer, try to get some rest. Tomorrow's hike includes some technical terrain that will require everyone to be mentally sharp." The night sounds of the upper Lamar Valley were different from those they had experienced at Cache Creek. The open grassland environment allowed sounds to carry much farther, but also made it easier to identify and locate their sources. Coyotes called from the surrounding ridges, their voices echoing across the valley floor. Somewhere in the distance, a great horned owl hooted repeatedly from its perch in the scattered trees along the river. At 9:30 p.m., the sounds of the feeding grizzly bear had stopped, leaving an ominous silence from the upstream direction. Marcus and Sarah sat back to back near the center of their camp, each monitoring a different sector of the surrounding area and communicating in whispers. The bear's movement patterns suggest it's following a regular routine, Sarah observed, feeding in the late afternoon and early evening, then moving to other areas during the night. Marcus was tracking every sound in the darkness around them. The question is where it goes after feeding. If it travels downstream along the river, it could pass right through our camping area. At 11:15 p.m., their question was answered. From the direction of the river, about 200 yards from their tents, came the unmistakable sound of a large animal moving through the water. Heavy splashing, occasional grunts, and the sound of something very large walking along the rocky shore. "It's coming this way," Marcus whispered, reaching for his bear spray and flashlight. Sarah was already holding her emergency whistle and satellite communicator, ready to signal for help if the situation escalated. "Should we wake the others?" "Not yet," Marcus replied. "Let's see what it does. If it's just passing through, waking everyone might create more noise and confusion than necessary." The sounds continued for nearly 10 minutes, with the large animal clearly moving along the river in their direction. At the closest point, Marcus estimated the bear was less than 100 yards from their tents, moving slowly and stopping frequently as if investigating different areas along the shore. The most terrifying moment came when the sounds stopped completely, somewhere very close to their camp. For 15 minutes, Marcus and Sarah sat in absolute silence, straining to hear any indication of where the bear had gone or what it was doing. "I can't hear it anymore," Sarah whispered finally. "That doesn't mean it's gone," Marcus replied. "Bears can move incredibly quietly when they want to. It could be anywhere." They maintained their vigil until 2 a.m., when Jennifer and Bobby took over the watch duty. Marcus briefed them quietly about the bear's passage along the river, emphasizing the need for constant vigilance and immediate response to any approaching sounds. "The bear knows we're here," Marcus warned them. "It may have picked up our scent or heard our voices. A curious bear can be just as dangerous as an aggressive one." Jennifer and Bobby's watch passed without any obvious signs of bear activity, though both of them found it impossible to relax completely in the open environment where they felt so exposed and vulnerable. Every sound seemed amplified and potentially threatening, and they found themselves jumping at the slightest noise from the darkness around them. At 6 a.m., dawn began to brighten the eastern sky above the Absaroka Mountains, revealing the frost-covered grassland where they had spent the night. As full daylight returned, the group conducted a thorough inspection of their campsite and the surrounding area for any signs of their nighttime visitor. "Here!" Marcus called from the riverbank. "Fresh tracks, definitely from last night." The bear had indeed passed very close to their camp, leaving clear paw prints in the muddy soil along the river's edge. The track showed that it had stopped multiple times, apparently investigating different scents or objects of interest along its route. "It was curious about us," Sarah concluded, studying the track pattern. "The way it stopped and started suggests it was trying to identify what we were and whether we posed any threat." Bobby was examining the tracks with a mixture of fascination and lingering fear. "How close did it actually come to our tents?" Marcus measured the distance carefully. "About 75 yards, close enough to see us clearly if it had wanted to, but it stayed near the water and continued on its route." Jennifer was relieved that the encounter had passed without incident, but was also increasingly concerned about the pattern of bear encounters they were experiencing. 3 separate instances of bear activity in less than 48 hours. Is that normal for this area? "It's peak feeding season," Sarah explained, "and we're traveling through prime habitat during the time of year when bears are most active." What we're experiencing is probably typical for this ecosystem, but most hikers never venture into areas this remote. They broke camp quickly and efficiently, leaving no trace of their presence in the pristine grassland environment. By 8 a.m., they were hiking south along the Lamar River toward their final campsite, 12 miles away near the confluence with Soda Butte Creek. The morning's hike took them through some of the most spectacular wildlife habitat in North America. The Lamar Valley opened before them like a vast, natural amphitheater, its grasslands supporting herds of elk, bison, and pronghorn antelope, while providing hunting grounds for wolves, bears, and other predators. This is the closest thing we have to the original Great Plains ecosystem, Sarah explained during a rest stop beside the river. The predator-prey relationships here function much as they did thousands of years ago. Marcus was using his binoculars to observe a pack of wolves hunting elk in the distance. Wolf pack, probably the Lamar pack, coordinating a hunt about 2 miles south of us. They're working together to separate a young elk from the herd. Bobby was mesmerized by the wildlife spectacle surrounding them. I had no idea places like this still existed. It's like being transported back in time to when the whole continent was wilderness. Jennifer was monitoring the weather, which had begun to change during the morning. High clouds were building from the west, and the wind was picking up strength and shifting direction. "Weather system moving in," she announced. "We might see precipitation by this afternoon." The trail followed the Lamar River through increasingly open terrain, providing excellent visibility, but also exposing them to the strengthening wind. They made good time across the valley floor, covering nearly 8 miles by noon, despite frequent stops to observe wildlife and navigate around marshy areas. At 12:30 p.m., they stopped for lunch beside a large beaver pond that had created a wetland oasis in the middle of the grassland environment. The pond was teeming with waterfowl, and moose tracks in the muddy shore indicated that large animals used the area regularly for drinking and feeding. "Last night's campsite," Sarah announced, consulting her map and GPS unit. 4 more miles through relatively easy terrain, then we'll be positioned for tomorrow's hike back to the trailhead. Marcus was studying the changing weather conditions with growing concern. Winds picking up and shifting to the northwest. That's usually a sign of a cold front moving through. We might be in for some challenging weather tonight. Bobby had grown much more confident during the 3 days of hiking, but the approaching weather made him nervous. "What happens if we get caught in a storm out here? We have good equipment and experience," Jennifer assured him. "Mountain weather can change rapidly, but we're prepared for anything short of a true emergency." As they resumed hiking toward their final campsite, the wind continued to strengthen and the temperature began to drop. By 2 p.m., they were hiking in 30-mile-per-hour gusts that made conversation difficult and forced them to lean into the wind to maintain their balance. The trail became more challenging as they approached the confluence of the Lamar River and Soda Butte Creek, with several stream crossings and sections that passed through dense riparian vegetation. The changing weather had made the wildlife more active, and they encountered fresh sign from multiple species as animals sought shelter from the approaching storm. At 3:45 p.m., they reached their final campsite, a protected grove of cottonwood trees beside Soda Butte Creek, about 2 miles from where their loop trail would rejoin the main Lamar Valley Trail. The site offered good protection from wind and weather, but was also clearly used regularly by wildlife, as evidenced by numerous animal trails converging on the creek. "Challenging site selection," Marcus observed, surveying their options. "Good protection from weather, but definitely active wildlife habitat." Sarah was checking her satellite communicator for weather updates. Storm front moving through tonight, possible snow at higher elevations, temperatures dropping to the low 20s. We need to be prepared for winter conditions. The group worked quickly to establish their camp before the weather deteriorated further. Tents were secured with extra guy lines and stakes, food storage was implemented with maximum security protocols, and everyone changed into their warmest clothing layers. "Different bear protocols tonight," Marcus announced. "The approaching storm will change animal behavior patterns. Bears often become more active before major weather events, seeking shelter and food opportunities." Jennifer was conducting her final medical assessment of Bobby, who had adapted remarkably well to the physical demands of wilderness travel. "You've exceeded all expectations," she told him. "Your body has adapted to the altitude, the physical demands, and the stress of wilderness travel." Bobby was feeling proud of his accomplishments, but also eager to complete the loop and return to familiar surroundings. "I can't believe we've been out here for 3 days without seeing another human being. It's incredible and terrifying at the same time." As evening approached, the wind reached sustained speeds of 40 miles per hour, with gusts that shook their tents and made normal conversation impossible. The temperature dropped rapidly, and by 6 p.m. they were experiencing winter conditions despite the calendar date of mid-September. "Storms intensifying faster than predicted," Sarah shouted over the wind noise, checking her weather radio for updated forecasts. "Heavy snow possible at elevations above 8,000 feet, which includes our location." Marcus was reinforcing their food storage system against the high winds when he noticed something that made him call the others over immediately. In the muddy soil beside the creek, partially protected from the wind by overhanging willows, were fresh grizzly bear tracks that appeared to have been made within the last few hours. "Large bear moving upstream along the creek," he announced, studying the tracks carefully. "The tracks are fresh enough that they haven't been disturbed by the wind." Jennifer felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as she realized they were once again sharing their immediate area with a large grizzly bear. "Same bear we've been encountering or a different one? Hard to tell," Sarah replied, comparing the tracks to photographs she had taken of previous encounters. "Could be the same bear, could be a different one. This drainage system probably supports multiple grizzlies." Bobby was staring at the tracks with a mixture of fear and fascination that had become familiar over the past 3 days. "It's like we're being followed." "Not followed," Marcus corrected. "We're traveling through established bear habitat during peak activity season. What we're seeing is normal bear behavior in an ecosystem that still functions the way it did before human development." The group spent the next hour implementing their most rigorous safety protocols yet, knowing that the combination of approaching storm conditions and active bear presence created a particularly challenging situation. Food storage was secured against both bears and high winds. Emergency equipment was distributed among all group members, and watch schedules were established for the night. "Maximum vigilance tonight," Sarah announced as the first snowflakes began to fall in the strengthening wind. "Weather conditions will affect visibility and hearing, making bear encounters more likely and potentially more dangerous." By 7 p.m., the snowfall had intensified to near blizzard conditions, with visibility reduced to less than 50 feet and wind gusts approaching 50 miles per hour. The group retreated to their tents for protection, but maintained communication through their two-way radios and continued to monitor their surroundings as much as possible. "This is serious weather," Jennifer reported from her tent, where she was monitoring her emergency radio for weather updates. "Blizzard warning issued for elevations above 7,000 feet, several inches of snow accumulation possible." Marcus was struggling to hear anything above the wind noise, but remained alert for any signs of approaching wildlife. "Bears don't hibernate during September snowstorms," he reminded the others over the radio. "They may actually be more active as they seek shelter and final feeding opportunities." The storm continued to intensify throughout the evening, creating conditions that made normal safety protocols nearly impossible to maintain. Visibility was zero, Hearing was compromised by wind noise, and movement outside their tents was dangerous due to the combination of darkness, snow, and high winds. At 9:30 p.m., during what should have been Marcus's watch period, the unthinkable happened. Through the howling wind and driving snow, the unmistakable sound of a large animal moving through their camp area became audible to everyone despite the storm noise. "Something's in camp," Marcus announced over the radio, his voice tense with controlled alarm. The sounds were close, definitely within the immediate camping area, and clearly indicated an animal much larger than anything they had encountered during their previous nights in the wilderness. Heavy footsteps, snuffling sounds, and the occasional grunt that could only come from a very large bear. "Everyone stay in your tents," Sarah instructed over the radio. "Do not move, do not make noise, let it investigate and hopefully move on." But the bear did not move on. For nearly 20 minutes, the large animal remained in their immediate camp area, moving around their tents and clearly investigating their presence with great interest. The sounds indicated it was checking their food storage area, examining their tents, and generally behaving in a way that suggested significant curiosity about the human presence. "It's not leaving," Jennifer whispered into her radio, her voice tight with fear. Bobby was curled in his sleeping bag, gripping his bear spray and trying to control his breathing as the massive predator moved around his tent. "I can hear it breathing," he whispered. "It's right outside." "It's right." The most terrifying moment came when the bear apparently brushed against Marcus's tent, causing the entire structure to shake and the fabric to bow inward under the pressure of its enormous bulk. Marcus could hear the animal's heavy breathing just inches from his head, separated only by the thin nylon wall of his tent. "Don't move," he whispered into his radio, though every instinct was screaming at him to run. The bear remained beside Marcus's tent for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably less than 5 minutes, apparently investigating the human scent and trying to understand what these strange objects were. Finally, the sounds indicated it was moving away, but slowly and without any apparent urgency. "It's moving toward the food storage area," Sarah reported, tracking the sounds as best she could through the storm noise. The bear spent another 10 minutes investigating their food storage system, but the bear-proof containers and rope suspension system held. Unable to access any food rewards, the bear eventually lost interest and moved away from their camp, disappearing into the storm as suddenly as it had appeared. "Is it gone?" Bobby whispered after several minutes of silence. "Can't tell for sure," Marcus replied. "The storm makes it impossible to track sounds beyond our immediate area. We need to assume it could return at any time." The group remained in their tents for the rest of the night, maintaining radio contact and monitoring their surroundings as much as possible through the continuing blizzard. No one slept more than brief intervals, and everyone remained fully dressed with emergency equipment immediately accessible. The storm finally began to moderate around 4 a.m., with the wind dropping to manageable levels and the snow changing to intermittent flurries. By dawn, 6 inches of fresh snow covered their campsite, transforming the familiar landscape into a winter wonderland that was beautiful, but also potentially dangerous. "Equipment check," Jennifer announced as they emerged from their tents into the post-storm environment. "Everyone report condition of gear and physical status." Remarkably, all their equipment had survived the storm intact, and no one had suffered any injuries or cold-related problems during the night. Their preparation and gear selection had proven adequate for the unexpected winter conditions. "Bear tracks everywhere," Marcus reported, conducting a survey of their campsite in the fresh snow. It definitely came back multiple times during the night. The snow had preserved a detailed record of the bears' movements through their camp. The tracks showed that the large grizzly had made at least 3 separate visits, each time investigating different aspects of their presence and spending considerable time examining their tents and equipment. "It was extremely curious about us," Sarah observed, photographing the track patterns for later analysis. "This level of persistence suggests either a bear that's had previous contact with humans or one that's particularly bold and inquisitive." Bobby was staring at tracks that passed within 2 feet of where his head had been while sleeping. "I can't believe how close it came. If it had wanted to get into my tent." "Bears are remarkably gentle considering their size and strength," Jennifer assured him. "Even a curious or investigating bear will usually avoid direct contact with humans unless it feels threatened or cornered." The group spent the next hour breaking camp in the snowy conditions, working carefully to pack wet equipment and navigate the slippery conditions created by the overnight accumulation. The temperature had risen above freezing, causing the snow to become heavy and wet, but the beautiful morning and clear skies indicated that the storm had passed. 8 miles back to the trailhead," Sarah announced, consulting her GPS unit and confirming their planned route. "Mostly downhill, but potentially treacherous conditions due to wet snow on rocks and logs." The final day's hike began at 8:30 a.m., with the group moving carefully through the transformed landscape. The fresh snow had created spectacular scenery, but also hazardous footing, particularly on the wooden bridges and rocky sections that could become slippery and dangerous. Marcus led the group, testing each potentially hazardous section before allowing the others to proceed. "Take your time," he advised. "An injury on our final day would be particularly frustrating and potentially serious given our distance from road access." The trail followed Soda Butte Creek through dense forest that had been transformed into a winter wonderland by the overnight snowfall. Snow-laden branches created natural arches over the trail, and the contrast between the white snow and autumn colors of the remaining leaves created some of the most beautiful scenery they had experienced during their entire trip. "This is why I love wilderness medicine," Jennifer commented during a rest stop beside a frozen waterfall. "Experiences like this remind you what's really important in life." Bobby had grown tremendously in confidence and wilderness skills during their 4-day adventure, but was also eager to return to familiar surroundings after the intensity of the previous night's storm and bear encounters. "I feel like I've aged about 10 years in 4 days, he admitted, but in a good way. At 10:30 a.m., they reached the junction, where their loop trail reconnected with the main Lamar Valley Trail, marking the beginning of their return to civilization. The snow depth decreased as they lost elevation, and by noon they were hiking through familiar terrain under clear skies and warming temperatures. 3 miles to the trailhead, Marcus announced during their final rest stop beside the wooden bridge where they had begun their adventure 4 days earlier. End of an incredible journey through some of the most spectacular wilderness in North America. Sarah was already composing her report for the Park Service, documenting their multiple bear encounters and the behavior patterns they had observed. "The data we've collected will be valuable for park managers understanding bear behavior during peak feeding season." Jennifer was conducting final medical assessments and was pleased to report that everyone had completed the challenging trip without significant injury or health problems. Excellent example of how proper preparation, equipment and protocols can enable safe travel through hazardous wilderness environments. At 1:45 p.m., they reached the Lamar Valley Trailhead parking lot where their adventure had begun 4 days earlier. The familiar sight of their vehicles and the return to marked trails and maintained facilities felt almost surreal after their extended immersion in true wilderness. "End of watch," Marcus announced, using his two-way radio to check in with Park County Search and Rescue. Lamar Valley Loop completed successfully, all personnel accounted for, no injuries or emergencies. Bobby was sitting on the tailgate of Sarah's vehicle, removing his hiking boots and marveling at how different he felt after 4 days in the wilderness. "I can't believe how much has changed. I feel like a completely different person than I was on Monday morning." Sarah was uploading her GPS data and photographs to her laptop, beginning the process of documenting their trip for both personal memories and scientific purposes. 4 days, 42 miles, elevation gain of over 8,000 feet, multiple grizzly bear encounters, and a September blizzard. Not a typical wilderness experience. Jennifer was organizing her medical kit and reflecting on the psychological aspects of their adventure. Wilderness experiences like this test people in ways that modern life rarely does. You learn things about yourself that you can't discover any other way. Marcus was conducting a final equipment check and planning the post-trip debriefing that would help them process their experiences and extract lessons learned for future wilderness travel. Every wilderness trip teaches you something new. This one reminded me why I became involved in search and rescue work. As they prepared to leave the trailhead and return to their regular lives, the 4 friends took time to absorb the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. They had traveled through some of the most remote and dangerous wilderness in North America, encountered multiple grizzly bears at close range, survived a September blizzard, and emerged with a deeper understanding of both the natural world and their own capabilities. "Group photo at the trailhead sign," Jennifer suggested, setting up her camera with a timer function. "We need to document this achievement." The photograph captured 4 people who looked weathered and tired, but also profoundly satisfied with what they had accomplished. Bobby's transformation from inexperienced college student to confident wilderness traveler was particularly evident, but all of them showed the effects of 4 days in an environment that demanded constant awareness, physical endurance, and mental resilience. "Same time next year?" Bobby asked, as they loaded their gear into their vehicles. "Absolutely," Marcus replied without hesitation. "But maybe we'll choose a route with slightly less bear activity." Sarah laughed, though she was already thinking about the scientific value of their observations and the opportunity to document bear behavior in one of North America's premier wilderness ecosystems. The bear encounters were actually the highlight of the trip from a biological perspective. How many people get to observe grizzly bears exhibiting natural behaviors in their native habitat? Jennifer was checking her watch and calculating the drive time back to Bozeman, where her responsibilities as emergency department director would resume the following morning. 4 days feels like 4 weeks when you're completely disconnected from technology and civilization. Re-entry is always challenging after trips like this. As they drove away from the Lamar Valley trailhead, each of them carried memories and insights that would influence their perspectives for years to come. They had experienced something increasingly rare in the modern world, genuine wilderness adventure that tested their limits and reminded them of their place in the natural world. The debriefing process continued over the following weeks as they shared photographs, compared notes, and processed the emotional impact of their experiences. Bobby wrote a detailed account of the trip for his environmental science class, focusing on the ecological relationships they had observed and the importance of preserving large wilderness ecosystems. Sarah incorporated their bear observations into her ongoing research on predator behavior and human-wildlife interactions. Jennifer added wilderness first aid scenarios based on their experiences to her emergency medicine training programs. Marcus used their trip as a case study for search and rescue training, emphasizing the importance of preparation, communication, and teamwork in hazardous environments. The story of their 4-day adventure through Yellowstone's backcountry became part of their personal histories and a shared bond that connected them to each other and to the wild places that still exist in North America. They had ventured into the grizzly's domain and emerged with a deeper understanding of both the beauty and danger that characterize true wilderness experiences. 6 months later, when they gathered for their annual trip planning meeting, the memories of their September adventure were as vivid as if it had happened the previous week. The photographs on Jennifer's computer screen showed 4 people transformed by their encounter with one of the last great wilderness areas on Earth, reminding them why such places must be preserved for future generations to experience and learn from. "Next year we go deeper," Sarah announced, spreading topographic maps across her dining room table. "I want to explore areas that see even fewer visitors, places where we might spend a week without encountering any other humans." Marcus smiled, remembering the sounds of the grizzly bear moving through their camp during the September blizzard. "As long as we're prepared for whatever the mountains decide to teach us." Bobby, now a senior in college and president of the university's Wilderness Club, had become an advocate for wild place preservation and an accomplished wilderness traveler in his own right. "I want to share experiences like this with other students. Help them understand what we're in danger of losing if we don't protect these ecosystems." Jennifer nodded, thinking about the patients she treated in the emergency department who had never experienced anything beyond urban and suburban environments. Wilderness experiences like this one change people's fundamental relationship with the natural world. They create conservationists and environmental advocates in ways that no amount of classroom education can achieve. As they planned their next adventure, the 4 friends reflected on how their September journey through grizzly country had become a defining experience that continued to influence their personal and professional lives. They had entered the wilderness as individuals with different backgrounds and motivations, but had emerged as a team that had faced genuine danger together and learned to depend on each other in ways that few people ever experience. The wilderness had tested them, taught them, and ultimately transformed them, providing lessons about resilience, teamwork, and the importance of preserving wild places for future generations. Their story was one of human beings choosing to step outside their comfort zones and engage with the natural world on its own terms, accepting the risks and embracing the rewards that come with genuine wilderness adventure. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and urban development, their 4-day journey through Yellowstone's backcountry represented something precious and increasingly rare: authentic contact with wild places and wild creatures that exist according to their own ancient rhythms and laws. They had been privileged to witness those rhythms firsthand, to share space with grizzly bears in their native habitat, and to experience the raw power of mountain weather in one of the last places on Earth where such experiences are still possible. The memories of those 4 days would remain with them forever, a reminder of what exists beyond the boundaries of human development and a compelling argument for the preservation of wilderness areas where future generations can experience similar transformations. They had ventured into the grizzly's domain and emerged as advocates for the wild places that shaped them, carrying forward a responsibility to protect what they had been privileged to experience. Years later, when each of them faced major life decisions or challenging circumstances, they would remember the lessons learned during those 4 days in Yellowstone's backcountry. The importance of preparation and planning, the value of teamwork and mutual support, the need for respect and humility when entering wild places, and the transformative power of experiences that test human limits and reveal hidden reserves of strength and resilience. Their story became part of the larger narrative of wilderness preservation and environmental education, demonstrating the continuing importance of protecting large ecosystems where natural processes can function without human interference. They had been witnesses to something extraordinary, a functioning wilderness ecosystem where predators and prey interact according to evolutionary patterns millions of years in the making. The grizzly bears they encountered were not just individual animals, but representatives of an ecological heritage that connects modern North America to its prehistoric past. By preserving the habitat these bears require and maintaining the wild places where such encounters are possible, society preserves something essential about the relationship between humans and the natural world. Their 4-day adventure through the grizzly's domain had provided them with memories, friendships, and insights that would last a lifetime. More importantly, it had created 4 passionate advocates for wilderness preservation who would spend the rest of their lives working to ensure that future generations could have similar opportunities to experience the transformative power of true wilderness adventure. The story of their journey through Yellowstone's backcountry serves as a reminder that wild places and wild creatures still exist, that humans can still experience authentic adventure and genuine risk in natural settings, and that such experiences remain essential for understanding our place in the larger community of life on Earth. In a world that often seems dominated by human constructions and concerns, their adventure provides evidence that the wild world persists and continues to offer lessons that cannot be learned anywhere else. As they drove away from the Lamar Valley trailhead that September afternoon, tired but exhilarated after their 4-day adventure, the 4 friends carried with them something precious and increasingly rare: the knowledge that they had experienced genuine wilderness and emerged changed by their encounter with the grizzly's domain. The next story is Polar Bear Attacks Airport Runway Worker Leaves 5. Dead in Chaos, February 18th, 2025. The Arctic wind howled across the tundra with a ferocity that seemed to pierce through every layer of clothing, every building, every soul brave enough to call Utqiagvik, Alaska, home. At 8:47 a.m. on February 18th, 2025, the temperature registered minus 34 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind gusts reaching 45 miles per hour. The sun hadn't risen above the horizon for weeks, leaving the small community of 4,000 residents in the grip of polar night, that peculiar Arctic phenomenon where darkness reigns supreme for months at a time. Carl Donnelly pressed his insulated glove against the frosted window of the Wiley Post Will Rogers Memorial Airport control tower, watching the ghostly outline of the runway lights disappear into the swirling snow. At 43 years old, Carl had been working as a runway maintenance technician for the North Slope Borough for 7 years. Ever since his divorce from Sarah back in Anchorage had left him searching for a fresh start somewhere far from the memories. His weathered face, marked by crow's feet from squinting against the Arctic glare and deep lines etched by years of outdoor work, reflected the harsh reality of life at the top of the world. "Another beautiful day in paradise," muttered Marcus Rivera, Carl's 28-year-old colleague, as he emerged from the equipment shed carrying a snowblower. Marcus had moved to Barrow from Phoenix 3 years ago, chasing the high wages that came with Arctic work and trying to pay off crushing student loans from his abandoned engineering degree. His thick black beard, now frosted with ice crystals, barely concealed the boyish enthusiasm that had somehow survived 3 brutal Arctic winters. Temperatures supposed to drop another 10 degrees by noon. Carl turned from the window, adjusting the orange reflective vest over his insulated coveralls. The airport was critical infrastructure for the community, serving as the primary link to the outside world for supplies, medical emergencies, and the countless researchers who passed through on their way to and from the Arctic research stations. Today's schedule included the arrival of Alaska Airlines Flight 61 from Anchorage at 11:30 a.m., carrying essential medical supplies for the village clinic, along with a cargo flight expected around 2 p.m., loaded with fuel and food supplies. "We need to get the runway cleared before the morning flight," Carl said, his breath forming visible clouds in the frigid air of the maintenance building. "Weather Service is predicting visibility to drop to near zero by this afternoon. If we don't get these planes in and out before then, we'll be socked in for days." Thomas Chen, the airport operations supervisor, poked his head out of the operations office, his round face flushed red from the cold, despite the building's heating system working overtime. At 51 years old, Thomas had been managing airport operations in Utqiagvik for 12 years, having transferred from the Fairbanks office after his wife Linda accepted a teaching position at the local school. His methodical nature and deep understanding of Arctic aviation had earned him respect throughout the North Slope aviation community. "Carl, we've got a problem," Thomas called out, waving a printed weather report. "No AA is upgrading the storm warning. We're looking at sustained winds of 60 miles per hour by early afternoon, with gusts up to 80. We need to get everything secured and cleared before this really hits." Inside the small break room, 3 other members of the maintenance crew were suiting up for the morning shift. Jennifer Walsh, 35 years old, and one of only 2 female maintenance technicians at the airport, had been working Arctic aviation for 6 years after leaving her job as a mechanic in Seattle following a messy breakup. Her red hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, was hidden beneath a thick winter cap as she checked the battery levels on her radio. Jennifer had earned a reputation for being fearless in bad weather and had personally saved the crew from several dangerous situations with her quick thinking and mechanical expertise. David Kim, 24 years old and the newest member of the team, had arrived in Utqiagvik just 8 months ago, fresh out of technical college and eager to prove himself in one of the world's most challenging work environments. His parents had immigrated from South Korea when he was 5, settling in Tacoma, Washington, where David had grown up with dreams of adventure and high-paying technical work. The Arctic had seemed like the perfect opportunity to gain experience and build savings, though the isolation and harsh conditions had proven more challenging than he'd anticipated. The 5th member of their team, Robert Bobby Nalakak, was a 39-year-old Inupiaq man whose family had lived in the region for generations. Bobby served as both a maintenance technician and unofficial wildlife liaison, using his traditional knowledge and deep understanding of Arctic animals to help keep the airport safe from the various creatures that occasionally wandered onto the runway. His grandfather had been a whaling captain, and Bobby himself had grown up hunting and fishing on the ice, developing an almost supernatural ability to read animal behavior and weather patterns. "Bobby, what's your read on the local wildlife situation?" Thomas asked as the crew gathered around a table covered with maintenance schedules and weather reports. "We've had some unusual sightings reported by the village patrol over the past few days." Bobby looked up from adjusting his muklux, traditional boots that his grandmother had made for him decades ago. His dark eyes held a concern that the others had learned to take seriously over the years. "There's been a big male polar bear hanging around about 2 miles east of town for the past week. Village patrol spotted him yesterday near the old DEW line station. He's been digging through some old dump sites, which means he's hungry. Very hungry." The mention of a polar bear near the community sent a subtle chill through the room that had nothing to do with the temperature. Polar bears were a constant presence in the region, but encounters with hungry males could be deadly. These massive predators, capable of weighing over 1,500 pounds and running at speeds of up to 25 miles per hour, viewed humans as potential prey rather than threats. "How big are we talking?" Carl asked, his experience with Arctic wildlife limited to the occasional Arctic fox or snowy owl that occasionally appeared around the airport perimeter. "From the tracks and the description, I'd say he's probably close to 12 feet long, maybe 800 or 900 pounds. That's big, even for around here, And the way he's been acting, staying close to human activity instead of heading out to the ice to hunt seals, tells me he's either sick or desperate. Bobby's voice carried the weight of traditional knowledge passed down through generations of people who had shared this harsh landscape with polar bears for thousands of years. Jennifer finished checking her radio and clipped it to her belt. What's the protocol if we spot him near the airport? Thomas consulted a thick manual marked Wildlife Management Procedures. The airport had extensive protocols for dealing with various Arctic animals, from caribou herds that occasionally crossed the runway to the rare polar bear that might wander into the airport area, attracted by the warmth and activity. First priority is immediate notification of all personnel and any aircraft in the area, Thomas read from the manual. All outdoor personnel are to immediately seek shelter in the nearest building. We contact the Village Public Safety Office and the Alaska State Troopers Wildlife Division. Under no circumstances should anyone attempt to approach or harass the animal. David raised his hand nervously. What if we're out on the runway when it shows up? Those buildings are pretty far apart, Bobby answered before Thomas could consult the manual. You run. Polar bears can outrun humans on flat ground, but they don't like to exert energy unless they're sure of a kill. Make noise, make yourself look big, and get to the nearest shelter as fast as possible. Don't turn your back, don't run in a straight line, and whatever you do, don't try to fight it. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering the day's scheduled activities, weather updates, and safety procedures. Outside, the wind continued to howl, occasionally rattling the windows of the small operations building. The runway lights, visible through the blowing snow, created an otherworldly scene that resembled something from a science fiction movie more than a functioning airport. At 9:15 a.m., the crew headed out to begin their pre-flight runway inspection. The airport's primary runway, designated 0725, stretched 6,500 feet across the tundra, with a secondary crosswind runway measuring 4,800 feet. Both runways required constant maintenance during the winter months, as blowing snow could accumulate to dangerous levels in a matter of hours. Carl and Marcus took the snow removal equipment to the main runway, while Jennifer and David headed to the terminal area to check the ground power equipment and baggage handling systems. Bobby remained near the operations building, monitoring weather conditions and maintaining radio contact with the crew as they spread out across the airport complex. The wind had picked up significantly since their morning briefing, and visibility had dropped to less than half a mile. The snow wasn't falling heavily, but the existing snow on the ground was being whipped around by the wind, creating whiteout conditions that came and went like ghostly apparitions across the landscape. Runway inspection team to operations. Carl's voice crackled through the radio as he and Marcus began their systematic check of the main runway. Visibility is marginal, but acceptable. We've got some snow accumulation on the eastern third of the runway. Nothing the equipment can't handle. Thomas acknowledged the report from the Warm Operations Office, where he was coordinating with air traffic control in Anchorage and monitoring weather updates from the National Weather Service. The morning flight was still scheduled to arrive on time, but the afternoon cargo flight was already being evaluated for possible delay or diversion to Fairbanks. Jennifer and David had finished their inspection of the terminal equipment and were heading back toward the operations building when David's radio crackled to life. Did anyone else just see something moving near the fuel tanks? The question sent an immediate chill through the radio network. The fuel tanks were located about 200 yards from the main terminal building, in an area that was well lit but somewhat isolated from the main operations. What kind of movement? Bobby's voice came through the radio with urgent concern. I'm not sure, David replied, his voice betraying nervousness. Something big and white. Could have been blowing snow, but it seemed to be moving against the wind. Bobby was already reaching for his binoculars and heavy winter coat. Everyone maintain your current positions. I'm going to take a look from the observation deck. The airport's operations building featured a small observation deck on the second floor that provided a 360-degree view of the airport complex and surrounding tundra. During clear weather, it was possible to see for miles across the flat landscape, but in current conditions, visibility was severely limited. Bobby climbed the narrow stairs to the observation deck, his boots echoing in the empty stairwell. The deck was enclosed but unheated, and the temperature difference hit him immediately as he opened the door. He raised his binoculars and began scanning the area around the fuel tanks, looking for any sign of the movement David had reported. For several minutes, he saw nothing but blowing snow and the occasional glimpse of the fuel tank structures through the shifting white curtain of wind-driven snow. Then, just as he was beginning to think David might have been mistaken, he saw it, a massive white shape moving slowly but deliberately between two of the largest fuel tanks. "Operations, this is Bobby," he said into his radio, trying to keep his voice calm and professional. "We have a confirmed polar bear in the fuel tank area. I repeat, we have a polar bear on airport property." The radio exploded with activity as Thomas immediately initiated the airport's emergency wildlife protocol. "All personnel, this is operations. We have a confirmed polar bear sighting in the fuel tank area. All outdoor personnel are to immediately proceed to the nearest shelter and remain there until further notice. I am contacting Village Public Safety and Alaska State Troopers." Carl and Marcus, who had been operating snow removal equipment on the far end of the runway, received the message clearly, but found themselves in a difficult situation. They were nearly a quarter-mile from the nearest building, operating loud equipment that would make it difficult to hear approaching wildlife, and the blowing snow severely limited their visibility. "Marcus, shut down the equipment," Carl ordered, his years of experience taking over. "We need to get to the terminal building right now." Marcus immediately shut down the snowblower he had been operating, and the sudden silence was replaced by the howling of the Arctic wind. Without the noise of the equipment, the environment seemed both more peaceful and infinitely more threatening. Jennifer and David had made it safely to the operations building, where they joined Thomas in monitoring the situation and coordinating with outside agencies. The Village Public Safety Office responded immediately to Thomas's call, dispatching 2 officers equipped with wildlife deterrent equipment, including flare guns, noisemakers, and as a last resort, high-powered rifles. "Alaska State Troopers Wildlife Division has been notified," Thomas announced to the crew. "They're dispatching a trooper from Fairbanks, but with current weather conditions, it could be several hours before he arrives. Village Public Safety should be here within 15 minutes. Bobby remained on the observation deck, tracking the bear's movements through his binoculars. The massive animal appeared to be investigating the fuel tanks, possibly attracted by the industrial smells or simply curious about the structures. Polar bears were known for their intelligence and curiosity, traits that often brought them into conflict with human activity in the Arctic. Bobby reported through his radio, "The bear is moving away from the fuel tanks, heading in a generally westward direction toward the main runway area." This news brought immediate concern, as Carl and Marcus were making their way across the open ground between the runway and the terminal building. In the current visibility conditions, it was entirely possible for the bear and the 2 men to encounter each other without warning. "Carl, Marcus, what's your current position?" Thomas called through the radio. "We're about halfway to the terminal," Carl responded, his breathing audible through the radio as he and Marcus trudged through the deep snow. "Visibility is maybe 50 yards. We can see the terminal lights, but not much else." Bobby adjusted his binoculars, trying to track both the bear and the 2 men moving across the open ground. The bear had disappeared behind a snow berm created by earlier plowing operations, and Bobby had lost visual contact. "I've lost sight of the bear," Bobby announced. "It was heading west toward the runway area, but I can't see it anymore." The next few minutes seemed to stretch into hours as Carl and Marcus continued their trek towards safety, while the rest of the crew monitored their progress from the warm operations building. The village public safety officers were en route, but the weather conditions were making travel difficult, even for vehicles equipped for Arctic conditions. At 9:47 a.m., Carl and Marcus finally reached the terminal building, both men breathing heavily from the exertion of walking through deep snow in heavy clothing and extreme cold. They were immediately ushered into the operations building, where Jennifer had hot coffee waiting, and Thomas was coordinating with multiple agencies. "Where's the bear now?" Carl asked, accepting a steaming cup of coffee gratefully. Bobby, who had been maintaining his vigil on the observation deck, provided an update. "I lost visual contact about 10 minutes ago. It was heading toward the runway area, but with this visibility, it could be anywhere." The arrival of the village public safety officers provided some relief to the tense situation. Officer Sarah Kanguk, a 32-year-old Inupiaq woman who had grown up in Utqiagvik, and Officer Mike Peterson, a 45-year-old transplant from Minnesota who had been working Arctic law enforcement for 8 years, brought with them extensive experience in dealing with polar bear encounters. "Has anyone maintained visual contact with the animal?" Officer Kanguk asked as she and her partner reviewed the situation with Thomas. Bobby tracked it from the fuel tanks toward the runway area, but visibility conditions made it impossible to maintain contact, Thomas explained, showing the officers a map of the airport complex and indicating where the bear had been spotted. Officer Peterson studied the map carefully. In these weather conditions, the bear could move significant distances without being detected. "Our priority needs to be keeping all personnel safe while we figure out where it went." The officer's vehicle was equipped with a public address system capable of producing extremely loud noises designed to frighten wildlife away from populated areas. They also carried flare guns, bear spray, and rifles as backup measures, though their preference was always to encourage animals to leave the area voluntarily rather than use lethal force. "What's the status of the morning flight?" Officer Kanguk asked. Thomas checked his communications with air traffic control. Alaska Airlines 61 is still scheduled to arrive at 11:30, but we obviously can't allow them to land with the polar bear potentially on or near the runway. We need to either locate and remove the bear or delay the flight. The decision was made to conduct a systematic search of the airport complex using the public safety vehicle while maintaining radio contact with all personnel who would remain safely inside the operations building. Bobby volunteered to accompany the officers, his knowledge of polar bear behavior and the local terrain making him invaluable for the search operation. At 10:15 a.m., the search team departed the operations building in the public safety vehicle, a modified pickup truck equipped with oversized tires, additional lighting and specialized equipment for Arctic conditions. The vehicle's public address system was tested before departure, producing a series of loud horn blasts and siren sounds that echoed across the empty landscape. "Search team to operations," Officer Kanguk's voice came through the radio as they began their systematic patrol of the airport perimeter. "Beginning search pattern Alpha. Visibility is extremely limited, but we're using thermal imaging equipment to assist." The thermal imaging device, mounted on the vehicle's roof, was capable of detecting heat signatures through the blowing snow, though its effectiveness was limited by the extreme cold and the amount of wind-blown snow in the air. Carl, Marcus, Jennifer, David and Thomas remained in the operations building, monitoring radio communications and tracking the search team's progress on a detailed map of the airport complex. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone understood that the presence of a polar bear not only threatened their immediate safety, but could also disrupt critical transportation links for the entire community. At 10:32 a.m., the search team reported their first significant finding. "Operations. This is the search team. We've found tracks in the snow near the intersection of the two runways. Definitely polar bear, and they're fresh. The animal crossed from the fuel tank area toward the eastern perimeter of the airport. Bobby's voice came through the radio with additional details. Based on the size and depth of these tracks, I'd estimate this bear at close to 900 pounds. The tracks are heading northeast, away from the terminal area, but still within the airport perimeter. This information was both encouraging and concerning. The bear appeared to be moving away from the immediate operational area of the airport, but it was still within the airport boundary and could potentially return at any time. Thomas made the decision to contact Alaska Airlines and recommend delaying Flight 61 until the bear situation could be resolved. The airline's operations center in Anchorage was understanding of the situation, having dealt with similar wildlife delays at airports throughout rural Alaska. Flight 61 is being held in Anchorage until we can confirm the runway area is secure, Thomas announced to the crew. The cargo flight scheduled for this afternoon has already been delayed indefinitely. The search team continued their patrol, following the bear tracks as they led toward the northeastern corner of the airport property, where the maintained airport grounds gradually gave way to the open tundra. The tracks were clear in the snow, indicating that the bear had passed through the area recently, possibly within the past hour. At 11:05 a.m., Officer Peterson spotted something through the thermal imaging device. I'm getting a heat signature about 300 yards northeast of our current position. It's large and stationary. Bobby raised his binoculars, scanning the area where the thermal device had detected heat. The blowing snow made visual confirmation difficult, but after several minutes of careful observation, he was able to make out the distinctive shape of a large polar bear lying in the snow near a cluster of abandoned fuel drums left over from the airport's earlier construction. Visual confirmation, Bobby reported. Large male polar bear, approximately 300 yards northeast of the runway intersection. The animal appears to be resting but alert. This discovery presented both an opportunity and a challenge. The bear was far enough from the runway to allow aircraft operations to resume, but it was still close enough to potentially return to the airport area, especially if attracted by aircraft noise or other activity. Officer Kanguk made the decision to attempt to encourage the bear to move further away from the airport, using noise deterrence. The public address system on their vehicle was capable of producing sounds at volumes and frequencies that polar bears typically found unpleasant and would associate with human activity. We're going to try to push the bear further east using acoustic deterrence, Officer Kanguk radioed to the operations building. Everyone should be prepared for the bear to potentially move in any direction, including back toward the airport complex. The first blast from the public address system echoed across the tundra like thunder, a combination of air horn and high-pitched siren that was designed to be as unpleasant as possible to wildlife. The effect on the polar bear was immediate and dramatic. Bobby watched through his binoculars as the massive animal lurched to its feet, clearly startled by the sudden noise. For a moment the bear stood on its hind legs, towering over the landscape as it tried to identify the source of the disturbance. The bear is up and alert, Bobby reported. It's looking in our direction. Officer Peterson activated the public address system again, this time using a different combination of sounds designed to convince the bear that the area was occupied by humans and therefore dangerous. The bear's response was not what they had hoped for. Instead of moving away from the airport, the bear began moving toward the source of the noise, its powerful gait carrying it across the snow-covered tundra with surprising speed for such a large animal. The bear is approaching our position, Officer Kanguk reported with growing concern. Distance approximately 200 yards and closing. Bobby grabbed the radio. Drive away from the airport. The bear is probably just curious about the noise, but if we stay here, it might follow us back to the buildings. Officer Pedersen immediately put the vehicle in reverse, backing away from their current position while keeping the bear in sight. The massive animal continued its approach, but its pace was steady rather than aggressive, suggesting curiosity rather than predatory behavior. "The bear is still approaching, but doesn't appear aggressive," Bobby observed. "Distance now approximately 150 yards. Recommend we continue moving away from the airport complex." The next few minutes involved a careful retreat as the search team led the curious polar bear away from the airport while maintaining enough distance to avoid provoking a defensive or predatory response. The bear followed them for nearly half a mile before losing interest and wandering off toward the east. By 11:45 a.m., the search team had successfully encouraged the bear to move more than a mile away from the airport complex, far enough to allow normal operations to resume. Alaska Airlines Flight 61 was cleared to depart Anchorage, with an estimated arrival time of 1:15 p.m. "Operations, this is the search team," Officer Kanguk reported as they completed a final patrol of the airport perimeter. "The bear has moved east and appears to be heading toward the coast. Airport area is clear for normal operations." The successful resolution of the morning's wildlife encounter brought relief to everyone involved. But Bobby's years of experience with polar bears left him with some lingering concerns. "That bear was way too comfortable around human activity," he mentioned to the officers as they headed back to the operations building. "Most polar bears in this area avoid the airport completely. The fact that this one came so close and showed so much curiosity about our vehicle suggests it might have had previous contact with humans. This observation would prove to be more significant than anyone realized at the time. Polar bears that had lost their natural fear of humans were often more dangerous than those that avoided human contact completely, as they were more likely to approach populated areas and more difficult to deter using conventional methods." The morning flight arrived without incident at 1:23 p.m., 8 minutes behind schedule due to the earlier delay. The passengers, a mix of local residents returning from medical appointments in Anchorage and researchers heading to various Arctic research stations, were unaware of the morning's wildlife drama as they deplaned into the bitter Arctic wind. Carl and his crew resumed their runway maintenance activities, working quickly to complete the snow removal that had been interrupted by the bear encounter. The afternoon weather forecast remained ominous, with the major storm system expected to arrive within hours, bringing with it the potential for complete closure of the airport for several days. As the crew worked to clear the runway, Bobby maintained an informal watch for any signs of the polar bear's return. His traditional knowledge told him that a bear exhibiting the behavior they had observed that morning was likely to return, especially if it was hungry and had associated the airport area with human activity. The cargo flight scheduled for 2 p.m. was delayed until 3:30 p.m. due to weather conditions at the departure airport in Anchorage, giving the maintenance crew additional time to complete their work and secure the airport facilities before the storm arrived. At 2:45 p.m., as Carl and Marcus were finishing the final passes with the snow removal equipment, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh tracks in the snow near the fuel tanks, tracks that definitely had not been there during their earlier inspection. "Bobby, can you come take a look at something?" David called through his radio, his voice tight with concern. Bobby immediately headed to David's location, accompanied by Jennifer, who had been working nearby. What they found confirmed Bobby's earlier fears about the bear's behavior. "These tracks are definitely from the same bear," Bobby said, kneeling down to examine the impressions in the snow. "But look at the pattern. These aren't wandering tracks. This bear came straight to this location, like it knew exactly where it was going." The tracks showed that the bear had approached the fuel tanks from the east, spent some time investigating the area, and then had headed north toward the terminal building, before apparently changing direction and heading back toward the perimeter fence. "How recent are these?" Jennifer asked, unconsciously moving closer to the operations building. Bobby studied the tracks carefully, noting how much snow had accumulated in the deepest impressions and the sharpness of the claw marks in the harder-packed snow. Very recent, maybe an hour, possibly less. This meant that while the morning search team had successfully encouraged the bear to leave the immediate airport area, it had returned sometime during the afternoon, possibly while the crew was working on the runway and the incoming flight was landing. Thomas received the news with growing concern. The pattern of behavior Bobby was describing suggested a polar bear that was not only unafraid of human activity, but was actively investigating human installations, possibly looking for food or simply driven by curiosity about the unusual activity in its territory. "We need to notify the Public Safety Office that the bear has returned," Thomas decided, "and we need to keep everyone close to the buildings until we can get another search team out here." Officer Kanguk responded to the call within 20 minutes, but she brought concerning news from the village. "We've had 3 more polar bear sightings in town since this morning. Either there are multiple bears in the area, or this one has been moving around a lot more than usual." The possibility of multiple polar bears in the area added a new dimension to the safety concerns. While encounters with single polar bears were dangerous enough, multiple bears could indicate a food shortage that was driving them to seek alternative food sources in human-populated areas. Bobby shared his growing concerns with the officer. "This bear, or these bears, are showing behavior that's not typical for the area. Usually polar bears avoid the airport completely because of all the noise and activity. The fact that we're seeing repeated visits suggests they're either very hungry or have learned to associate this area with food." A thorough search of the airport perimeter revealed more troubling evidence. Additional tracks near the waste disposal area behind the terminal building, signs that at least one bear had been investigating the dumpsters, and what appeared to be claw marks on the metal siding of one of the storage buildings. "This is escalating," Officer Kanguk observed. "We're looking at a pattern of behavior that suggests this bear is becoming habituated to human areas. That's extremely dangerous." The decision was made to increase patrols around the airport and to implement additional safety measures for airport personnel. All outdoor work would be conducted in pairs, with constant radio contact and immediate access to shelter. The village public safety office would maintain increased patrols of the airport area, and additional deterrent equipment would be stationed at key locations around the complex. As the afternoon wore on, the weather conditions continued to deteriorate. The wind had increased to sustained speeds of over 50 miles per hour, with gusts approaching 70 miles per hour. Visibility had dropped to less than a quarter mile, and the temperature had fallen to minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The cargo flight from Anchorage was finally cancelled due to weather conditions, leaving the airport crew to focus on securing the facility for what promised to be a severe Arctic storm. All loose equipment needed to be secured or moved indoors. Fuel lines needed to be protected from freezing, and the runway needed to be cleared one final time before operations ceased entirely. Carl, Marcus, Jennifer, David and Bobby worked systematically to prepare the airport for the storm, following well-established procedures that had been developed through years of experience with Arctic weather. Despite the polar bear concerns, the work had to be completed to prevent equipment damage and ensure that the airport could resume operations once the storm passed. At 4:30 p.m., as the crew was securing the last of the outdoor equipment, Bobby noticed something that sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the Arctic wind. Fresh tracks in the snow leading directly toward the operations building, tracks that were so recent that snow had not yet begun to accumulate in them. "Everyone inside right now," Bobby called through his radio, his voice carrying an urgency that brought immediate compliance from the rest of the crew. As the team gathered in the operations building, Bobby quickly explained what he had observed. The tracks indicated that a polar bear had approached to within 50 yards of the building, where they were now taking shelter, close enough that it had probably been watching them work. "This changes everything," Thomas said, reviewing the safety protocols. "If this bear is willing to approach this close to active human activity, it's exhibiting predatory behavior." Officer Kanguk arrived within minutes of being notified, but the deteriorating weather conditions were making her job increasingly difficult. Visibility was now less than 50 feet, and the wind was strong enough to make vehicle operation dangerous. "We need to make a decision," she announced to the assembled group. "Either we evacuate all personnel to the village until this weather passes, and we can bring in additional resources to deal with the bear situation, or we maintain a secure position here and wait for conditions to improve." The decision was complicated by several factors. The storm was expected to last at least 24 hours, possibly longer. The village was only a few miles away, but travel in current conditions was extremely dangerous. The airport facility was well equipped for extended stays, with backup power, food supplies, and communications equipment. Thomas made the decision to remain at the airport with a skeleton crew while maintaining constant contact with village public safety and the Alaska State Troopers. Carl, Marcus, and Bobby volunteered to stay, while Jennifer and David would be transported to the village as soon as weather conditions permitted. As if to emphasize the danger of their situation, a loud thump against the side of the building brought immediate silence to their discussion. Everyone froze, listening intently as the sound was repeated, accompanied by what sounded like scratching or scraping against the metal siding. Bobby moved quietly to the window, carefully peering through a gap in the storm shutters that had been closed to protect the glass from wind-driven debris. What he saw confirmed their worst fears. A massive polar bear was standing directly outside the building, its huge paws pressed against the siding as it investigated the structure. The bear was close enough that Bobby could see the individual guard hairs of its coat and the intelligent gleam in its dark eyes as it methodically examined the building. "Polar bear, directly outside the south wall," Bobby whispered into his radio, though the building's occupants were close enough to hear him directly. "It's investigating the building structure." Officer Kanguk quietly moved to radio for backup, though she knew that response time in current weather conditions would be severely limited. The village had additional officers and equipment, but reaching the airport in whiteout conditions would be extremely dangerous. For the next 20 minutes, the bear methodically investigated the exterior of the operations building, apparently fascinated by the smells, sounds, and warmth emanating from the structure. Its behavior was neither aggressive nor fearful, but rather showed the methodical curiosity of a highly intelligent predator investigating something new in its environment. The building's heating system cycled on, and the bear immediately moved to investigate the exhaust vent, standing on its hind legs to sniff at the warm air flowing from the building's interior. This brought the massive animal's head to within inches of one of the building's windows, separated only by storm shutters and a single pane of glass. "That bear weighs at least 800 pounds, Carl whispered, watching through a crack in the shutters as the animal continued its investigation. "If it decides it wants to get in here, I'm not sure these walls will stop it." Bobby's traditional knowledge of polar bear behavior provided some reassurance, but also highlighted the seriousness of their situation. Polar bears are incredibly intelligent and curious. This one is trying to figure out what this building is and whether it represents a threat or an opportunity. As long as we stay quiet and don't give it a reason to feel threatened or excited, it will probably lose interest and move on. The bear's investigation continued for another 10 minutes before it apparently lost interest in the building and wandered away into the blowing snow. Officer Kanguk used the opportunity to call for additional backup and equipment, though response time remained problematic due to weather conditions. State Troopers Wildlife Division has been notified of the escalating situation, she reported. They're trying to get a helicopter with tranquilizer equipment up from Fairbanks, but current weather has all aircraft grounded throughout northern Alaska. The realization that they were essentially on their own until weather conditions improved added weight to their situation. The building was secure and well supplied, but they were dealing with one of the Arctic's most formidable predators, an animal that had no natural enemies and viewed humans as potential prey. As evening approached, the storm reached its full intensity. Wind speeds exceeded 70 miles per hour, visibility dropped to zero, and the temperature fell to minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, the landscape had become an alien world of horizontal snow and howling wind that would be deadly to anyone caught in the open. Inside the operations building, the small group settled in for what promised to be a long night. The building's emergency supplies included enough food and water for several days, along with backup communications equipment and an independent power system. Thomas maintained regular contact with both the village public safety office and air traffic control in Anchorage, providing updates on their situation and weather conditions. At 7:30 p.m., as the group was eating a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers, another sound from outside brought immediate attention. This time, it was a series of loud bangs and crashes coming from the direction of the equipment storage area. Bobby moved to the radio equipment and attempted to contact Officer Kanguk, who was maintaining patrol duties from the village public safety office. "This is Bobby at the airport. We're hearing loud noises from the equipment storage area. Sounds like something is getting into our gear." "Copy that, Bobby. Unfortunately, we can't respond in current weather conditions. Are you still secure in the operations building?" "Affirmative. The building is secure, but we're concerned about equipment damage." The noises continued for over an hour, suggesting that the polar bear was methodically investigating and possibly damaging equipment stored in the outdoor storage area. Without being able to see what was happening, the airport crew could only listen and hope that the damage would be minimal. Carl reviewed the inventory of equipment stored in the outdoor area and realized that several critical pieces of runway maintenance equipment were potentially at risk. Snow removal equipment, ground power units, and specialized tools worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were stored in areas that would be easily accessible to a determined polar bear. "We're looking at potentially significant equipment damage," Carl reported to Thomas. "Some of that gear is critical for airport operations. If the bear destroys the wrong equipment, we could be looking at extended closure even after the weather clears." Thomas made the difficult decision to document the situation thoroughly for insurance and maintenance purposes, but acknowledged that there was nothing they could do to prevent equipment damage in current conditions. The safety of personnel took absolute priority over property concerns. Around 9 p.m., the noises from the equipment area ceased, but they were replaced by new sounds that were even more concerning. Heavy footsteps and scratching sounds indicated that the bear had returned to the operations building and was again investigating the structure. This time, the bear's investigation seemed more focused and determined. Instead of the casual curiosity it had shown earlier, the animal now seemed to be actively trying to find a way into the building. The sounds of claws against metal siding were punctuated by huffing and heavy breathing that was audible even through the building's insulated walls. "The bear is back, and it's acting differently," Bobby observed, monitoring the animal's behavior through the limited visibility provided by the storm shutters. "It's not just curious anymore. It's actively trying to get into the building." Officer Kanguk received the update with growing concern. "We've been monitoring weather conditions, and it's going to be at least 6 more hours before conditions improve enough for us to consider a response. Can you maintain your secure position?" Thomas assessed their situation carefully. The building was structurally sound and designed to withstand Arctic conditions, but it had not been designed to resist a determined polar bear. The doors were heavy and well sealed for weather protection, but the locks were standard commercial hardware rather than security-grade equipment. "We're secure for now," Thomas reported, "but this bear is showing increasingly aggressive behavior. If it continues to escalate, we may have a problem." The bear's investigation of the building continued for another 2 hours, during which time it tested doors, scratched at windows, and even climbed onto the roof to investigate ventilation equipment. Each new sound brought increased tension to the small group huddled inside the warm building. Around 11 p.m., the bear made its most determined attempt yet to gain entry to the building. The main entrance door, a heavy steel door designed for Arctic conditions, became the focus of the bear's attention. The sound of massive claws scraping against metal was clearly audible inside the building, accompanied by the huffing and growling of a large, frustrated predator. "It's trying to get through the main door," Marcus observed, his voice tight with stress. "Can that door hold?" Bobby moved to examine the door's hardware and construction. The door itself was heavy steel, mounted in a reinforced frame and sealed with multiple weather strips. The lock was a commercial-grade deadbolt, sturdy but not designed to resist the physical force that a polar bear could bring to bear. "The door should hold, but if this bear really wants to get in here, it's got the strength to cause problems," Bobby assessed. Polar bears can generate tremendous force with their paws and claws. They're capable of breaking through ice that's several inches thick. Officer Kanguk coordinated with additional resources from the village, but the reality remained that no help could reach them until weather conditions improved. The group was on their own, with one of the Arctic's most dangerous predators literally at their door. The bear's assault on the door continued for 20 minutes before it apparently became frustrated and moved to investigate other potential entry points. The sound of the animal moving around the building's perimeter was clearly audible, accompanied by periodic scratching and banging as it tested windows, vents, and any other opening it could find. "This bear has definitely learned to associate buildings with food or warmth," Bobby explained to the group as they listened to the animal's continued investigation. "It's not acting like a wild polar bear anymore. It's acting like an animal that has learned humans have things it wants." The implications of this observation were deeply troubling. A polar bear that had lost its natural fear of humans and learned to associate human activity with food would be extremely dangerous, not just to the airport crew, but to the entire community of Utqiagvik. Around midnight, the bear's behavior changed again. Instead of the methodical investigation they had been listening to, the sounds became more sporadic and seemed to be moving away from the building. Bobby carefully checked through the storm shutters and reported that he could no longer see the bear in the immediate vicinity. "I think it's moved away from the building, but with this visibility, it could be anywhere," Bobby reported. "We should maintain our secure position until daylight and better weather." Thomas made the decision to implement watches throughout the night, with 2 people awake at all times to monitor for any signs of the bear's return. The building's communications equipment would be monitored continuously, and regular check-ins would be maintained with village public safety. Carl and Marcus took the first watch from midnight to 3 a.m., while Thomas and Bobby tried to get some rest on the small cots kept in the building for emergency situations. The building was warm and well lit, but the constant awareness of the massive predator somewhere outside in the storm made restful sleep nearly impossible. During the early morning hours, the storm began to show signs of weakening. Wind speeds dropped from the sustained 70 miles per hour they had been experiencing to more manageable 40 mile per hour sustained winds. Visibility improved marginally, though conditions remained far too dangerous for vehicle travel. At 3 a.m., Bobby and Thomas took over the watch, allowing Carl and Marcus to try to get some rest. The building was quiet except for the steady howl of the wind and the periodic rattling of windows and doors as gusts hit the structure. Around 4:30 a.m., Bobby detected movement outside through the thermal imaging equipment that Officer Kanguk had left with them. A large heat signature was moving slowly across the airport complex, approximately 200 yards from the operations building. "We've got movement on thermal," Bobby reported quietly to Thomas and through the radio to Village Public Safety. "Large heat signature, roughly 200 yards south of our position." Officer Kanguk acknowledged the report from the village office where she was coordinating response plans for First Light. "Copy that. Weather conditions are slowly improving. We're hoping to get a response team to your location by 7 a.m. if current trends continue." The heat signature remained in the area for nearly an hour, moving slowly around the airport complex in what appeared to be a systematic search pattern. Bobby tracked its movement through the thermal equipment, noting that the bear seemed to be investigating various buildings and equipment areas. "It's definitely the same bear," Bobby observed. "The size and movement patterns match what we observed yesterday. It's conducting what looks like a territorial patrol of the entire airport area." This behavior suggested that the polar bear had claimed the airport as part of its territory, a development that would have serious implications for future airport operations, even after the immediate crisis was resolved. As dawn approached, weather conditions continued to improve gradually. Visibility increased to nearly a quarter mile, and wind speeds dropped to manageable levels for experienced Arctic drivers. Officer Kanguk and her partner began preparations for a response mission to the airport, coordinating with additional resources from the state troopers and the local emergency response team. At 6:45 a.m., the thermal imaging detected the bear approaching the operations building once again. This time, however, its behavior was different from the previous evening's aggressive investigation. The animal seemed more cautious, approaching slowly and stopping frequently to assess the situation. "The bear is back, but it's acting more wary this time," Bobby reported. "Distance approximately 100 yards and approaching slowly." This change in behavior might have indicated that the bear was becoming less interested in the building, or it might have meant that the animal was developing a more strategic approach to investigating human structures. Either way, the group maintained their secure position inside the building. Officer Kanguk and her response team departed the village at 7:15 a.m., equipped with additional deterrent equipment, including powerful flare guns, bear spray, and noise-making devices. The State Trooper Wildlife Specialist was still grounded in Fairbanks due to weather conditions, but local expertise and equipment would have to suffice for the immediate situation. As the response team made their way toward the airport, the polar bear completed another investigation of the operations building before moving away toward the fuel tank area. Bobby tracked its movement through the thermal equipment, noting that the animal seemed to have established a pattern of investigating the entire airport complex on a regular basis. Bobby reported, "The bear has moved away from our building toward the fuel tanks. This is the third time it's followed this same general route. It's definitely established a patrol pattern for this area." Officer Kanguk and her team arrived at the airport at 8:20 a.m., bringing immediate relief to the small group that had spent the night under siege. The weather had improved enough to allow vehicle operation, though visibility remained limited and wind speeds were still dangerously high. "Everyone okay in there?" Officer Kanguk called through the radio as her team took positions around the operations building. "All secure," Thomas responded. "No injuries, but we've had continuous polar bear activity throughout the night. The animal has been investigating the building repeatedly and has apparently established some kind of territorial claim to the airport area." The response team's arrival coincided with another approach by the polar bear, which appeared from the direction of the fuel tanks and began moving toward the operations building. This time, however, The bear encountered the response team's vehicle and immediately changed its behavior. Instead of the curious investigation that had characterized its earlier approaches, the bear now showed clear signs of agitation and defensive behavior. It stood on its hind legs, towering over the landscape as it assessed this new development in its claimed territory. Large male polar bear, approximately 150 yards northeast of the operations building, Officer Kanguk reported to her backup units. Animal appears agitated by our presence. Recommend immediate implementation of deterrent protocols. The response team's first attempt at deterrence involved the use of loud noisemakers and flare guns, devices that had proven effective in previous polar bear encounters. However, this bear's response was not what they had expected. Instead of retreating from the noise and light, the bear stood its ground and actually began approaching the response team's vehicle. This behavior indicated an animal that had lost its natural fear of humans and their equipment, a development that made the situation significantly more dangerous. The bear is not responding to standard deterrence, Officer Kanguk reported with growing concern. It's actually approaching our position, distance now approximately 100 yards. Bobby, monitoring the situation from inside the operations building, provided additional insight based on his traditional knowledge. This bear has been around human activity too much. It's not afraid of vehicles or noise anymore. That makes it extremely dangerous. The response team was forced to retreat to a safer distance while developing a new strategy for dealing with a polar bear that was unresponsive to conventional deterrent methods. The bear followed their vehicle for nearly 200 yards before losing interest and returning to its investigation of the airport complex. "We're dealing with a habituated bear," Officer Kanguk reported to her supervisors. "Standard deterrent methods are ineffective. We need to consider more aggressive intervention methods." The Alaska State Troopers Wildlife Division, monitoring the situation from Fairbanks, authorized the use of tranquilizer equipment if it could be safely deployed. However, tranquilizing a polar bear in current weather conditions would be extremely challenging and potentially dangerous for both the bear and the response team. Around 10 a.m., weather conditions had improved enough to allow the airport crew to leave the operations building under escort from the response team. The plan was to evacuate all non-essential personnel to the village while maintaining a small team to monitor the situation and protect critical airport infrastructure. As the evacuation was being organized, the polar bear made its most aggressive move yet. Apparently motivated by the increased human activity around the operations building, the bear approached to within 50 yards of the building and began displaying clear signs of predatory behavior. "The bear is showing hunting behavior," Bobby observed, watching the animal's body language through the building's windows. "Head low, ears forward, direct stare. This is not curiosity anymore. This is a predator evaluating prey." Officer Kanguk made the immediate decision to abort the evacuation. "Everyone back inside the building. The bear is displaying aggressive behavior. We're maintaining secure positions until we can bring in additional resources." The bear's aggressive display continued for nearly 20 minutes, during which time it approached to within 30 yards of the operations building before finally retreating to a position near the fuel tanks, where it could observe the area while remaining partially concealed. "This situation is escalating beyond our local capabilities," Officer Kanguk reported to State Trooper Headquarters. "We need specialized wildlife intervention resources immediately." And the state troopers coordinated with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to deploy a specialized polar bear response team, but weather conditions throughout northern Alaska continued to hamper aircraft operations. The earliest possible arrival time for specialized equipment and personnel was estimated at 2 p.m., assuming continued improvement in weather conditions. Inside the operations building, the airport crew settled in for an extended standoff with the polar bear. The animal had positioned itself in a location where it could observe both the operations building and the response team's vehicle, effectively controlling access to the airport complex. Thomas used the time to assess potential equipment damage from the bear's overnight investigation of the storage areas. Radio contact with various monitoring systems throughout the airport complex revealed that several pieces of equipment had been damaged or destroyed during the bear's territorial patrol. Preliminary damage assessment shows significant impact to our snow removal equipment and ground power systems, Thomas reported to airport management in Anchorage. Even after we resolve the bear situation, we're looking at potential extended closure for equipment repairs. The economic impact of the polar bear encounter was already mounting. Cancelled flights, damaged equipment, and the cost of emergency response resources would total hundreds of thousands of dollars, not including the potential impact on the community if airport closure extended beyond the current weather emergency. Around noon, the polar bear changed its behavior pattern again. Instead of maintaining its observation position near the fuel tanks, the animal began a methodical investigation of every building and structure within the airport complex. This systematic approach suggested a level of intelligence and planning that was deeply concerning to the response team. The bear is conducting what looks like a complete survey of the airport facility, Bobby observed, tracking the animal's movement through binoculars from the operations building. It's investigating every building, every piece of equipment, every potential food source or shelter. This behavior indicated that the polar bear was not simply passing through the area, but was actively claiming the airport as part of its territory. Such territorial behavior would make the animal extremely difficult to remove and virtually guaranteed that it would return even if temporarily deterred. Officer Kanguk coordinated with wildlife management experts to develop a comprehensive strategy for dealing with a territorialized polar bear. The options were limited and all carried significant risks. "We're looking at 3 potential approaches," she explained to the airport crew during a radio briefing. "First, we can attempt to tranquilize and relocate the bear, but that requires specialized equipment and perfect weather conditions. Second, we can attempt to establish a long-term deterrent presence that makes the area unattractive to the bear. Third, as a last resort, we may need to consider lethal removal if the bear poses an ongoing threat to human safety." The prospect of lethal removal was deeply troubling to everyone involved, particularly to Bobby and Officer Kanguk, whose cultural backgrounds emphasized the importance of polar bears in the Arctic ecosystem. However, a polar bear that had lost its fear of humans and established territorial claims in a populated area represented an ongoing threat that could not be ignored. At 1:30 p.m., weather conditions had improved enough to allow helicopter operations, and the State Trooper wildlife specialist was finally able to depart Fairbanks with specialized tranquilizer equipment. The helicopter's estimated arrival time at Utqiagvik was 3:15 p.m., assuming continued favorable weather conditions. The arrival of specialized resources provided hope for a resolution that would ensure both human safety and the welfare of the polar bear. Tranquilizing and relocating the animal to a remote area of the Arctic ice would remove the immediate threat while giving the bear a chance to resume normal wild behavior. However, the bear's continuing presence and increasingly territorial behavior suggested that even relocation might not provide a permanent solution. Polar bears had excellent spatial memory and navigation abilities, and there were documented cases of relocated bears returning to areas where they had established territorial claims. As the afternoon progressed, the polar bear continued its methodical investigation of the airport complex, showing no signs of losing interest in the area. Its behavior had evolved from simple curiosity to clear territorial establishment, a development that would have long-term implications for airport operations even after the immediate crisis was resolved. This bear isn't going to leave voluntarily, Bobby concluded, based on his observations of the animal's behavior patterns. It's claimed this area as its territory, and polar bears don't give up territory easily. The specialized helicopter arrived at Utqiagvik at 3:22 p.m., carrying State Trooper Wildlife Specialist Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, a 20-year veteran of Arctic wildlife management with extensive experience in polar bear encounters. The helicopter also carried specialized tranquilizer equipment designed specifically for use on large Arctic carnivores. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison conducted a briefing with the local response team, reviewing the bear's behavior patterns and developing a strategy for safe tranquilization and removal. The plan required precise coordination between the helicopter crew, ground support team, and monitoring personnel. This bear is exhibiting classic territorial behavior, Morrison explained to the assembled team. It's claimed this area and will defend it against perceived threats. Our approach needs to account for the possibility that the bear will react aggressively to our intervention. The tranquilization operation was scheduled for 4 p.m., taking advantage of the improved visibility and relatively calm wind conditions. The helicopter would approach from the east, staying downwind of the bear to avoid detection until the last possible moment. Bobby would serve as the primary observer, using his traditional knowledge of polar bear behavior to provide real-time assessment of the animal's condition and response to the intervention. Officer Kanguk and her team would maintain ground support positions to ensure the safety of the operation. At 3:55 p.m., the polar bear was located near the terminal building, conducting another investigation of the structure's perimeter. The animal appeared calm and focused on its territorial patrol, providing an ideal opportunity for the tranquilization attempt. Target acquired, Morrison reported from the helicopter as it approached the bear's position. Large male polar bear, estimated weight 800 to 900 pounds. Animal appears calm and unaware of our approach. The helicopter moved into position approximately 100 yards from the bear before the animal detected their presence. The bear's reaction was immediate and dramatic, standing on its hind legs and displaying clear signs of territorial aggression. Bear is showing defensive posture, Morrison reported, proceeding with tranquilization attempt. The specialized tranquilizer dart, designed for large Arctic carnivores, required precise placement to be effective without causing harm to the animal. Morrison had successfully tranquilized dozens of polar bears during his career, but each encounter presented unique challenges and risks. The first dart was fired at 4:03 p.m., striking the bear in the shoulder area, where it would be quickly absorbed into the animal's bloodstream. The bear's reaction to the dart was immediate agitation, followed by confused behavior as it tried to identify the source of the sudden pain. Direct hit on target, Morrison reported. Dart placement appears optimal. Estimated time to sedation, 8 to 12 minutes. The critical period following tranquilizer dart placement was always the most dangerous, as the bear would experience increasing disorientation while still retaining much of its strength and aggressiveness. The response team maintained safe distances while monitoring the animal's condition. For the first few minutes following the dart impact, the bear showed typical post-dart behavior, including attempts to remove the dart by rubbing against objects and increased agitation. However, as the tranquilizer began to take effect, the animal's movements became less coordinated and its aggressive displays less intense. Bear is showing initial signs of sedation, Morrison observed from the helicopter. Movement becoming unsteady. Estimated 3 to 5 minutes until full sedation. At 4:09 p.m., the polar bear finally succumbed to the tranquilizer and collapsed in the snow near the terminal building. The massive animal's breathing remained steady and strong, indicating that the tranquilizer had achieved its intended effect without causing harmful side effects. Target is down and appears stable, Morrison reported. Beginning approach for condition assessment and preparation for transport. The ground team, led by Officer Kanguk and including Bobby as wildlife advisor, approached the sedated bear with extreme caution. Even under sedation, polar bears retained enough strength to cause serious injury if they experienced an unexpected partial recovery. Morrison rappelled from the helicopter to conduct a detailed assessment of the bear's condition. The animal was indeed a large, mature male, weighing an estimated 850 pounds and measuring approximately 11 feet in length. Its physical condition appeared good, with no obvious signs of injury or disease that might explain its unusual behavior around human activity. This is a healthy adult male in good physical condition, Morrison reported as he examined the sedated bear. No obvious medical issues that would account for its habituated behavior toward humans. Blood samples were taken for later analysis to check for diseases or toxins that might have affected the bear's behavior. The animal was also fitted with a tracking collar that would allow wildlife management officials to monitor its movements after relocation. The process of preparing the bear for transport required specialized equipment and careful attention to the animal's vital signs. The helicopter was equipped with a cargo net designed specifically for transporting large wildlife, and the bear would be airlifted to a location on the Arctic ice approximately 100 miles northeast of Utqiagvik. Transport preparation complete, Morrison announced at 4:35 p.m. Bear vital signs remain stable, ready for relocation transport. The helicopter liftoff with the sedated polar bear was a dramatic sight that marked the end of the immediate crisis at Wiley Post Will Rogers Memorial Airport. However, the long-term implications of the encounter would continue to affect airport operations and community safety for months to come. As the helicopter disappeared into the Arctic sky, carrying its massive cargo toward the remote ice, where the bear would hopefully resume normal wild behavior, the airport crew finally emerged from the operations building to assess the damage and begin the process of restoring normal operations. The equipment damage was extensive. The polar bear's overnight investigation had resulted in damaged snow removal equipment, destroyed ground power units, and significant structural damage to several storage buildings. The total cost of repairs and equipment replacement was estimated at over $200,000. We're looking at several days of repair work before we can resume normal operations, Thomas reported to airport management. Even with expedited parts delivery, we're dealing with specialized Arctic equipment that's not readily available. The community impact extended beyond the airport itself. The incident had demonstrated that polar bears in the region were becoming increasingly comfortable around human activity, a development that posed ongoing risks to residents and visitors alike. Bobby worked with village public safety and state trooper wildlife management to develop enhanced monitoring and response protocols for future polar bear encounters. The incident had highlighted gaps in existing wildlife management procedures and the need for improved coordination between various agencies. This bear's behavior was unlike anything I've seen in my years working with polar bears in this region, Bobby explained to wildlife management officials. It showed a level of comfort around human activity that suggests either previous positive encounters with humans or a significant change in available natural food sources. The investigation into the bear's behavior would continue for months, involving analysis of the blood samples, tracking data from the monitoring collar, and coordination with research institutions studying polar bear ecology in the Arctic. The incident would eventually contribute to important research on human polar bear interactions in a changing Arctic environment. Media coverage of the incident brought national attention to the challenges facing Arctic communities as climate change and human development altered traditional wildlife patterns. The story was covered by major news networks and wildlife documentaries, highlighting both the drama of the encounter and the broader environmental issues it represented. For the airport crew who had lived through the 24-hour ordeal, the incident would remain a defining experience in their careers. The combination of extreme weather, equipment challenges, and one of the Arctic's most formidable predators had tested their skills, courage, and teamwork in ways they had never imagined. Carl reflected on the experience as the crew worked to repair damaged equipment and restore normal airport operations. In 7 years of working up here, I've dealt with everything from blizzards to equipment failures, but nothing prepared me for being trapped in a building with a polar bear trying to get in. Marcus, despite his youth and relative inexperience in the Arctic, had proven himself during the crisis by maintaining calm professionalism and following safety protocols, even under extreme stress. "It's not something you ever think about when you take a job at an Arctic airport," he observed. "But now I understand why they spend so much time on wildlife safety training." Jennifer and David, who had been evacuated to the village during the height of the crisis, returned to help with the recovery effort. Their experience during the evacuation had provided additional insight into how the incident had affected the broader community. "People in the village were really concerned," Jennifer reported. "This wasn't just an airport problem. Everyone understood that a polar bear showing this kind of behavior around human activity could affect the whole community." The incident prompted a comprehensive review of wildlife management protocols for all airports in northern Alaska. The Federal Aviation Administration worked with state wildlife management agencies to develop enhanced guidelines for polar bear encounters, including improved detection systems, response procedures, and coordination protocols. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a polar bear researcher from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, visited the airport 2 weeks after the incident to study the site and interview the personnel involved. Her research was part of a broader study on changing polar bear behavior in Arctic communities. What makes this incident particularly significant is the bear's persistent territorial behavior around human infrastructure, Dr. Mitchell explained. This goes beyond simple food-seeking behavior and suggests that polar bears may be adapting to human-modified landscapes in ways we don't fully understand. The tracking collar placed on the relocated bear provided valuable data on its movements and behavior after relocation. For the first month after relocation, the bear remained in the remote ice area where it had been released, apparently resuming normal hunting and territory establishment behavior. However, 3 months after the incident, tracking data revealed that the bear had begun moving south toward populated areas, raising concerns that the relocation had not permanently resolved the behavioral issues that had led to the original airport encounter. The tracking data suggests that this bear has learned to associate human activity with resources or opportunities, Dr. Mitchell observed. Even after relocation to prime polar bear habitat, it's choosing to move toward human-populated areas. This development led to enhanced monitoring protocols for the Utqiagvik area and improved coordination between wildlife management agencies and local communities. Early warning systems were established to provide rapid notification of polar bear approaches to populated areas. The long-term psychological impact of the incident on the airport crew varied among individuals. Carl found that his years of Arctic experience had prepared him well for the stress of the encounter, and he continued working at the airport with increased awareness of wildlife safety protocols. Marcus experienced some difficulty sleeping and increased anxiety about outdoor work for several weeks after the incident. But gradual exposure to normal airport operations helped him regain confidence in his work environment. Bobby's traditional knowledge and cultural connection to polar bears helped him process the experience within a broader context of human-wildlife relationships in the Arctic. He became an advocate for improved traditional knowledge integration in wildlife management planning. My grandfather always taught me that polar bears are thinking animals, Bobby reflected. They learn from every encounter with humans, and they remember. This bear learned something from its time at the airport that changed how it relates to human activity. The incident also had significant economic impacts on the region. Beyond the direct costs of equipment damage and emergency response, the airport closure and flight cancellations affected medical supply deliveries, mail service, and passenger travel throughout northern Alaska. Insurance investigations extended for months as adjusters attempted to determine coverage for wildlife damage to specialized Arctic equipment. The case eventually contributed to changes in insurance policies for Arctic infrastructure, specifically addressing wildlife-related damage claims. Thomas received recognition from the Federal Aviation Administration for his leadership during the crisis, particularly his decision-making under extreme conditions and his coordination with multiple agencies during the emergency response. The airport operations staff demonstrated exceptional professionalism and adherence to safety protocols during an unprecedented emergency situation, the FAA commendation letter stated. Their actions ensured the safety of all personnel while maintaining critical communication links during severe weather conditions. The incident became a case study used in training programs for Arctic airport operations throughout Alaska and northern Canada. The combination of extreme weather, wildlife encounters, and equipment challenges provided valuable lessons for airport personnel working in similar environments. Officer Sarah Kanguk received the Alaska State Troopers Public Safety Award for her coordination of the emergency response and her leadership during the extended crisis. Her cultural knowledge and understanding of polar bear behavior had been critical factors in the successful resolution of the incident. Officer Kanguk's leadership during this incident exemplified the importance of combining traditional knowledge with modern emergency response techniques, the award citation read. Her actions prevented what could have been a tragic encounter between humans and one of the Arctic's most formidable predators. The incident contributed to ongoing research into climate change impacts on Arctic wildlife behavior. As sea ice conditions changed and traditional hunting grounds became less accessible, polar bears throughout the Arctic were increasingly coming into contact with human communities. Dr. Mitchell's research team published several scientific papers based on data collected during and after the airport incident. The research contributed to better understanding of polar bear behavioral adaptation and informed policy decisions regarding Arctic community safety. The Utqiagvik Airport incident provides unique insight into how individual polar bears can develop complex behavioral relationships with human infrastructure, one of the published papers concluded. These findings have important implications for both wildlife management and community safety planning in the Arctic. The bear involved in the incident was tracked for 2 years following its relocation. During this period, it made several approaches to other human communities in northern Alaska, confirming researchers' concerns about its learned behavior around human activity. Eventually, the bear was involved in a second incident near the village of Kaktovik, where it approached a school building and displayed similar territorial behavior to what had been observed at the airport. This second incident resulted in the difficult decision to remove the bear permanently, as its behavior posed an ongoing threat to human safety. The decision to remove this bear was made only after extensive evaluation of all alternatives, stated the Alaska Department of Fish and Game in their official report. The animal's learned behavior around human activity made relocation ineffective and posed continuing risks to Arctic communities. The permanent removal of the bear provided closure to the airport incident, but also highlighted the broader challenges facing Arctic communities as climate change and human development continued to alter traditional wildlife patterns. The airport's recovery from the incident took 3 months, during which time operations were limited by equipment constraints and enhanced wildlife monitoring protocols. The repairs and upgrades eventually resulted in improved facilities and better emergency preparedness for future wildlife encounters. New wildlife detection systems were installed around the airport perimeter, including motion sensors and thermal imaging cameras that could provide early warning of animal approaches. Enhanced lighting and communication systems improved the ability of airport personnel to respond quickly to wildlife sightings. The improvements we've made as a result of this incident have significantly enhanced our ability to operate safely in Arctic conditions, Thomas observed 1 year after the incident. While we hope never to face a similar situation, we're much better prepared if we do. The incident became part of the oral history of Utqiagvik, joining other stories of dramatic encounters between humans and Arctic wildlife. Bobby worked with community elders to document the incident within the context of traditional knowledge and cultural understanding of polar bear behavior. This story will be told for generations, Bobby predicted. It's a reminder that we share this land with powerful animals that deserve our respect and understanding. But it's also a reminder that we must be prepared to protect our community when necessary. The anniversary of the incident was marked by community education events and safety training sessions focused on polar bear awareness and emergency preparedness. The airport crew participated in these events, sharing their experiences and the lessons learned during the crisis. Dr. Mitchell's ongoing research continued to reference the incident as a significant case study in human polar bear interactions. Her work contributed to improved safety protocols for Arctic communities and better understanding of polar bear behavioral adaptation to changing Arctic conditions. The February 18th incident at Utqiagvik represents a watershed moment in our understanding of polar bear-human interactions, Dr. Mitchell stated in a presentation to the International Polar Bear Association. The detailed documentation of this encounter provides invaluable data for managing similar situations in the future. The incident's impact extended beyond the immediate participants to influence policy and planning throughout Arctic Alaska. Enhanced coordination protocols between airports, wildlife management agencies, and local communities were established based on lessons learned during the crisis. The Federal Aviation Administration incorporated the incident into updated guidance documents for Arctic airport operations, specifically addressing wildlife encounter protocols and emergency communication procedures during severe weather conditions. 5 years after the incident, the airport had experienced several minor wildlife encounters, but no repetition of the dramatic territorial behavior displayed by the polar bear in February 2025. Enhanced monitoring and response systems had proven effective in detecting and deterring wildlife before conflicts could develop. Carl, now serving as senior maintenance supervisor, used the incident as a training tool for new airport personnel. Every new employee hears this story, he explained. It's not meant to frighten people, but to help them understand the environment we work in and the importance of following safety protocols. The story of the polar bear attack at Utqiagvik Airport became a defining moment in Arctic aviation history, demonstrating the unique challenges faced by communities and workers in one of the world's most extreme environments. The successful resolution of the crisis without human casualties stood as a testament to the value of training, preparation, and respect for the natural world. As climate change continued to alter Arctic conditions and wildlife patterns, the lessons learned from the February 18th incident remained relevant for communities throughout the Arctic. The balance between human activity and wildlife conservation would continue to require careful management, traditional knowledge, and innovative solutions. The incident served as a reminder that in the Arctic, humans are visitors in a landscape dominated by forces and creatures far more powerful than themselves. Survival and success in this environment required humility, preparation, and deep respect for the natural world that surrounded and shaped every aspect of life at the top of the world. The memory of those 24 hours when a single polar bear brought one of Alaska's most remote airports to a standstill would endure as a powerful reminder of the ongoing relationship between humans and wildlife in the changing Arctic. For those who lived through the experience, it remained a defining moment that demonstrated both the vulnerability and resilience of human communities in one of Earth's most challenging environments.